Permaculture, a designer's manual. This book is about designing sustainable human settlements and preserving and extending natural systems. It covers aspects of designing and maintaining a cultivated ecology in any climate, the principles of design, design methods, understanding patterns in nature, climatic factors, water, soils, earthworks, techniques and strategies in the different climatic types, aquaculture, and the social, legal, and economic design of human settlement. It calls into question not only the current methods of agriculture, but also the very need for a formal food agriculture if wastelands and the excessive lawn culture within towns and cities are devoted to food production and small livestock suited to local needs. The world can no longer sustain the damage caused by modern agriculture, monocultural forestry, and thoughtless settlement design, and in the near future we will see the end of wasted energy or the end of civilization as we know it due to human-caused pollution and climate changes. Strategies for the necessary changes in social, investment policy, politics itself, and towards regional or village self-reliance are now desperately needed, and examples of these strategies are given. It is hoped that this manual will open the global debate that must never end, and so give a guide to the form of a future in which our children have at least a chance of a reasonable existence. Born in 1928 in the small fishing village of Stanley, Tasmania, Bill Mollison left school at the age of 15 to help run the family bakery. He soon went to sea as a shark fisherman and seaman, bringing vessels from post-war disposals to southern ports, and until 1954 filled a variety of jobs as a forester, mill worker, trapper, snarer, tractor driver, and naturalist. Bill joined the CSIRO Wildlife Survey Section in 1954, and for the next 9 years worked in many remote locations in Australia as a biologist, doing fieldwork on rabbits, locusts, mutton birds, and forest regeneration problems with marsupials. In 1963, he spent a year at the Tasmania Museum in curatorial duties, then returned to fieldwork with the Inland Fisheries Commission, surveying the macrofauna of inland waters and estuaries, recording food chains and water conditions in all the rivers and lagoons of Tasmania. Returning to studies in 1966, he lived on his wits running cattle, bouncing at dances, shark fishing, and teaching part-time at an exclusive girls' school. Upon receiving his degree in biogeography, he was appointed to the University of Tasmania, where he later developed the unit of environmental psychology. During his university period, which lasted for 10 years, Bill independently researched and published a 3-volume treatise on the history and genealogies of the descendants of the Tasmanian Aborigines. In 1974, he and David Holmgren developed and refined the permaculture concept, leading to the publication of Permaculture 1 and Permaculture. New. Since leaving the university in 1978, Bill has devoted all his energies to furthering the system of permaculture and spreading the idea and principles worldwide. He has taught thousands of students and has contributed many articles, curricula, reports, and recommendations for farm projects, urban clusters, and local government bodies. In 1981, Bill Mollison received the Right Livelihood Award, sometimes called the Alternative Nobel Prize, for his work in environmental design. In recent years, he has established a trust and aid fund to enable permaculture teachers to reach groups in need, particularly in the poorer parts of the world, with the aim of leaving a core of teachers locally too. Continue appropriate educational work. Bill Mollison is the executive director of the Permaculture Institute, which was established in 1979 to teach the practical design of sustainable soil, water, plant, and legal and economic systems to students worldwide. Permaculture, a Designer's Manual, by Bill Mollison. Illustrated by Andrew Jeeves. Manuscript and editing, Renimia Slay. Tagari Publications, Tialgum, Australia. Preface. To many of us who experienced the ferment of the late 1960s, there seemed to be no positive direction forward, although almost everybody could define those aspects of the global society that they rejected, and these include military adventurism, the bomb, ruthless land exploitation, the arrogance of polluters, and a general insensitivity to human and environmental needs. From 1972 to 1974, I spent some time laterally with David Holmgren enveloping an interdisciplinary earth science permaculture with a potential for positivistic, integrated, and global outreach. It was January 1981 before the concept of permaculture seemed to have matured sufficiently to be taught as an applied design system when the first 26 students graduated from an intensive 140-hour lecture series. Today, we can count thousands of people who have attended permaculture design courses, workshops, lectures, and seminars. Graduates now form a loose global network and are effectively acting in many countries. The permaculture movement has no central structure, but rather a strong sense of shared work. Everybody is free to act as an individual, to form a small group, or to work within any other organization. We cooperate with many other groups with diverse beliefs and practices. Our system includes good practices from many disciplines and systems and offers them as an integrated whole. Great changes are taking place. These are not as a result of any one group or teaching, but as a result of millions of people defining one or more ways in which they can conserve energy, aid local self-reliance, or provide for themselves. All of us would acknowledge our own work as modest. It is the totality of such modest work that is impressive. There is so much to do, and there will never be enough people to do it. We must all try to increase our skills, to model trials, and to pass on the results. If a job is not being done, we can form a small group and do it. When we criticize others, we usually point the finger at ourselves. It doesn't matter if the work we do carries a permaculture label, just that we do it. By 1984, it had become clear that many of the systems we had proposed a decade earlier did, in fact, constitute a sustainable earth care system. Almost all that we had proposed was tested and tried, and where the skills and capital existed, people could make a living from products derived from stable landscapes, although this is not a primary aim of permaculture, which seeks first to stabilize and care for land, then to serve household, regional, and local needs, and only thereafter to produce a surplus for sale or exchange. In 1984, we held our first International Permaculture Conference and awarded about 50 applied diplomas to those who had served 2 years of applied work since their design course. Those of us who belong to the permaculture family have cause to be proud, but not complacent. Work has scarcely begun, but we have a great team of people which increases in numbers daily. To empower the powerless and create 1 million villages to replace nation-states is the only safe future for the preservation of the biosphere. Let interdependence and personal responsibility be our aims. Author's note. This volume was written for teachers, students, and designers. It follows on and greatly enlarges on the initial introductory texts Permaculture 1, 1978, and Permaculture 2, 1979, both of which are still in demand a decade after publication. Very little of the material in this book is reproduced from the foundation texts. Each volume of this work carries a surcharge of 50C, which will be paid by Tagari Publications to the Permaculture Institute. The Institute, a public trust, holds the funds so generated in trust for tree planting, and from time to time releases monies to selected groups who are active in permanent reforestation. In this way, both publisher and readers can have a clear conscience about the use of the paper in this volume, or in any book published by Tagari Publications. Our trust funds are open to receive any such levy from other ethical publishers. Permaculture defined. And its use. Permaculture is a word coined by the author. Its copyright is vested in the Permaculture Institutes and their College of Graduates, and is guarded by them for the purposes of consistent education. Permaculture, permanent agriculture, is the conscious design and maintenance of agriculturally productive ecosystems which have the diversity, stability, and resilience of natural ecosystems. It is the harmonious integration of landscape and people providing their food, energy, shelter, and other material and non-material needs in a sustainable way. Without permanent agriculture, there is no possibility of a stable social order. Permaculture design is a system of assembling conceptual, material, and strategic components in a pattern which functions to benefit life in all its forms. The philosophy behind permaculture is one of working with rather than against nature, of protracted and thoughtful observation rather than protracted and thoughtless action, of looking at systems in all their functions rather than asking only one yield of them, and of allowing systems to demonstrate their own. Ikes, evolutions. The word permaculture can be used by anybody adhering to the ethics and principles expressed herein. The only restriction on use is that of teaching. Only graduates of a permaculture institute can teach permaculture, and they adhere to agreed-on curricula developed by the College of Graduates of the Institutes of Permaculture. Conventions used references and abbreviations. Minor references are given in the text, and those useful to chapter contents only are located at the close of those chapters. Key references are assembled at the close of the book, and are superscripted as numbers in the text. Seasons and directions, so that the text and figures are useful and readable in both hemispheres, I have used the words sun side or sunwards, and shade side or polewards rather than south and north. And converted months to seasons as below. Southern hemisphere. Access to information material in this work can be fairly easily accessed in these ways. Chapter and section contents are listed in the table of contents. Main subjects are listed in the index. There is a list of the common and Latin names of plants used in the text located in the appendix. Also located in the appendix is a glossary of terms used. Some few words are recently coined or, like permaculture, are the conceit of the author. To forestall needless correspondence, subscription to the International Permaculture Journal 113 and more, R&D and more, NSW 2042. Australia gives information on permaculture themes, reviews recent publications, gives news of events, publishes a directory of permaculture centers, and has a host of other useful data. Further resources are also listed in the appendix. These may be further refined by the use of first week of. For the same reason, the symbol below is used in figures to indicate the sun direction rather than the north or south symbol. One hopes this prevents the problem of all those good North Americans wandering on the north face of their hills, looking for the sun, poised dangerously upside down on the earth as they are. X cover story. The great oval of the design represents the egg of life, that quantity of life which cannot be created or destroyed, but from within which all things that live are expressed. Within the egg is coiled the rainbow snake, the earth shaper of Australian and American Aboriginal peoples. We have a legend that explains the formation of the hills, the rivers, and all the shapes of the land. Every time it rains and I see a beautiful rainbow, I am reminded of the legend of the rainbow serpent. In the beginning, the earth was flat, a vast, gray plain. As the rainbow serpent wound his way across the land, the movement of his body heaped up the mountains and dug troughs for the rivers. With each thrust of his huge, multicolored body, a new landform was created. At last, tired with the effort of shaping the earth, he crawled into a waterhole. The cool water washed over his vast body, cooling and soothing him each time the animals visited. The waterhole, they were careful not to disturb the rainbow serpent, for although they could not see him, they knew he was there. Then one day, after a huge rainstorm, they saw him. His huge colored body was arching from the waterhole, over the treetops, up through the clouds, across the plain to another waterhole. To this day, the Aborigines are careful not to disturb the rainbow serpent as they see him, going across the sky from one waterhole to another. From Gulpilil Stories of the Dreamtime, compiled by Hugh Rule and Stuart Goodman, published by William Collins, Sydney, 1979. Within the body of the rainbow serpent is contained the tree of life, which itself expresses the general pattern of life forms, as further elaborated in the chapter on pattern in this book. Its roots are in earth, and its crown in rain, sunlight, and wind. Elemental forces and flows shown external to the oval represent the physical environment, the sun, and the matter of the universe, the materials from which life on earth is formed. The whole cycle and form is dedicated, as is this book, to the complexity of life on earth. She. Chapter 1. Introduction. 1.1. Permaculture Design Philosophy. Although this book is about design, it is also about values and ethics, and above all, about a sense of personal responsibility for earth care. I have written at times in the first person to indicate that it is not a detached, impersonal, or even unbiased document. Every book or publication has an author, and what that author chooses to write about is subjective. For that person alone determines the subject, content, and the values expressed or omitted. I am not detached from, but have been passionately involved with this earth, and so herein give a brief vision of what I think can be, achieved by anyone. The sad reality is that we are in danger of perishing from our own stupidity and lack of personal responsibility to life. If we become extinct because of factors beyond our control, then we can at least die with pride in ourselves, but to create a mess in which we perish by our own inaction makes nonsense of our claims to consciousness and morality. There is too much contemporary evidence of ecological disaster which appalls me, and it should frighten you too. Our consumptive lifestyle has led us to the very brink of annihilation. We have expanded our right to live on the earth to an entitlement to conquer the earth, yet conquerors of nature always lose. To accumulate wealth, power, or land beyond one's needs in a limited world is to be truly immoral, be it as an individual, an institution, or a nation-state. What we have done, we can undo. There is no longer time to waste nor any need to accumulate more evidence of disasters. The time for action is here. I deeply believe that people are the only critical resource needed by people. We ourselves, if we organize our talents, are sufficient to each other. What is more, we will either survive together, or none of us will survive. To fight between ourselves is as stupid and wasteful as it is to fight during times of natural disasters, when everyone's cooperation is vital. A person of courage today is a person of peace. The courage we need is to refuse authority and to accept only personally responsible decisions. Like war, growth at any cost is an outmoded and discredited concept. It is our lives which are being laid to waste. What is worse, it is our children's world which is being destroyed. It is therefore our only possible decision to withhold all support for destructive systems and to cease to invest our lives in our own annihilation. The prime directive of permaculture. The only ethical decision is to take responsibility for our own existence and that of our children. Make it now. Most thinking people would agree that we have arrived at final and irrevocable decisions that will abolish or sustain life on this earth. We can either ignore the madness of uncontrolled industrial growth and defense spending that is in small bites or large catastrophes, eroding life forms every day, or take the path to life and survival. Information and humanity, science and understanding are in transition. Long ago, we began by wondering mainly about what is most distant, astronomy and astrology or our ancient preoccupations. We progressed millennia by millennia to enumerating the wonders of Earth, first by naming things, then by categorizing them, and more recently by deciding how they function and what work they do within and without themselves. This analysis has resulted in the development of different sciences, disciplines, and technologies, a welter of names and the sundering of parts, a proliferation of specialists, and a consequent inability to foresee results or to design. Integrated systems. The present great shift in emphasis is on how the parts interact, how they work together with each other. 1. How dissonance or harmony in life systems or society is achieved. Life is cooperative rather than competitive. and life forms of very different qualities may interact, beneficially with one another and with their physical environment. Even the bacteria live by collaboration, accommodation, exchange, and barter. Lewis Thomas, 1974. Principle of cooperation. Cooperation, not competition, is the very basis of existing life systems and of future survival. There are many opportunities to create systems that work from the elements and technologies that exist. Perhaps we should do nothing else for the next century but apply our knowledge. We already know how to build, maintain, and inhabit sustainable systems. Every essential problem is solved, but in the everyday life of people this is hardly apparent. The wage slave, peasant, landlord, and industrialist alike are deprived of the leisure and the life spirit that is possible in a cooperative society which applies its knowledge. Both warders and prisoners are equally captive in the society in which we live. If we question why we are here and what life is, then we lead ourselves into both science and mysticism, which are coming closer together as science itself approaches its conceptual limits. As for life, it is the most open of open systems, able to take from the energy resources in time and to re-express itself not only as a lifetime, but as a descent and an evolution. Lovelock, 1979, has perhaps best expressed a philosophy or insight which links science and tribal beliefs. He sees the earth and the universe as a thought process or as a self-regulating, self-constructed and reactive system, creating and preserving the conditions that make life possible and actively adjusting to regulate disturbances. Humanity, however, in its present mindlessness, may be the one disturbance that the earth cannot tolerate. The Gaia hypothesis is for those who like to walk or simply stand and stare, to wonder about the earth and the life it bears, and to speculate about the consequences of our own presence here. It is an alternative to that pessimistic view which sees nature as a primitive force to be subdued and conquered. It is also an alternative to that equally depressing picture of our planet as a demented spaceship, forever traveling, driverless and purposeless around an inner circle of the sun. J. Lovelock, 1979. For every scientific statement articulated on energy, the Aboriginal tribespeople of Australia have an equivalent statement on life. Life, they say, is a totality neither created nor destroyed. It can be imagined as an egg from which all tribes' life forms issue into, which all return. The ideal way in which to spend one's time is in the perfection of the expression of life, to lead the most evolved life possible, and to assist in and celebrate the existence of life forms other than humans, for all come from the same egg. The totality of this outlook leads to a meaningful daily existence, in which one sees each quantum of life eternally trying to perfect an expression towards a future and possibly transcendental perfection. It is all the more horrific, therefore, that tribal peoples, whose aim was to develop a conceptual and spiritual existence, have encountered a crude scientific and material culture whose life aim is not only unstated, but which relies on pseudo-economic and technological systems for its existence. The experience of the natural world and its laws has almost been abandoned for closed, artificial, and meaningless lives, perhaps best typified by the dreams of those who would live in space satellites and abandon a dying Earth. I believe that unless we adopt sophisticated Aboriginal belief systems and learn respect for all life, then we lose our own, not only as lifetime, but also as any future opportunity to evolve our potential. Whether we continue without an ethic or a philosophy, like abandon and orphan children, or whether we create opportunities to achieve maturity, balance, and harmony, is the only real question that faces the present generation. This is the debate that must never stop. A young woman once came to me after a lecture in which I wondered at the various concepts of afterlife, the plethora of heavens offered by various groups. Her view was, this is heaven, right here. This is it. Give it all you've got. I couldn't better that advice. The heaven or hell we live in is of our own making. An afterlife, if such exists, can be no different for each of us. 1.2 Ethics. In earlier days, several of us researched community ethics as adopted by older religious and cooperative groups seeking for universal principles to guide our own actions. Although many of these guidelines contained as many as 18 principles, most of these can be included in the three below, and even the second and third arise from the first, the ethical basis of permaculture. 1. Care of the earth, provision for all life systems to continue and multiply. 2. Care of people, provision for people to access those resources necessary to their existence. 3. Setting limits to population and consumption. By governing our own needs, we can set resources aside to further the above principles. This ethic is a very simple statement of guidance and serves well to illuminate everyday endeavors. It can be coupled to a determination to make our own way, to be neither employers nor employees, landlords nor tenants, but to be self-reliant as individuals, and to cooperate as groups. For the sake of the earth itself, I evolved a philosophy close to Taoism from my experiences with natural systems. As it was stated in Permaculture 2, it is a philosophy of working with rather than against nature, of protracted and thoughtful observation rather than protracted and thoughtless action, of looking at systems and people in all their functions rather than asking only one yield of them, and of allowing systems to demonstrate their own evolutions. A basic question that can be asked in two ways is, What can I get from this land or person? Or what does this person or land have to give if I cooperate with them? Of these two approaches, the former leads to war and waste, the latter to peace and plenty. Most conflicts I find lay in how such questions are asked, and not in the answers to any question. Or to put it another way, we are clearly looking for the right questions rather than for answers. We should be alert to rephrase or refuse the wrong question. It has become evident that unity in people comes from a common adherence to a set of ethical principles, each of us perhaps going our own way, at our own pace, and within the limits of our resources, yet all leading to the same goals, which in our own case is that of a living, complex, and sustainable Earth. Those who agree on such ethics, philosophies, and goals form a global nation. How do a people evolve an ethic, and why should we bother to do so? Humans are thinking beings with long memories, oral and written records, and the ability to investigate the distant past by applying a variety of techniques from dendrochronology to archaeology, pollen analysis to the geological sciences. It is therefore evident that behaviors in the natural world, which we thought appropriate at one time, later proved to be damaging to our own society in the long term. For example, the effects of biocidal pest controls on soils and water. Thus, we are led by information, reflection, and careful investigation to moderate, abandon, or forbid certain behaviors and substances that in the long term threaten our own survival. We act to survive. Conservative and cautious rules of behavior are evolved. This is a rational and sensible process, responsible for many taboos in tribal societies. From a great many case histories, we can list some rules of use, for example, the rule of necessitous use, that we leave any natural system alone until we are, of strict necessity, forced to use it. We may then follow up with rules of conservative use. Having found it necessary to use a natural resource, we may insist on every attempt to reduce waste, hence pollution, thoroughly replace lost minerals, do a careful energy accounting, and make an assessment of the long-term negative biosocial effects on society and act to buffer or eliminate these. In practice, we evolve over time to various forms of accounting for our actions. Such accounts are fiscal, social, environmental, aesthetic, or energetic in nature, and all are appropriate to our own survival. Consideration of these rules of necessitous and conservative use may lead us step by step to the basic realization of our interconnectedness with nature, that we depend on good health in all systems for our survival. Thus, we widen the self-interested idea of human survival on the basis of past famine and environmental disaster to include the idea of the survival of natural systems, and can see, for example, that when we lose plant and animal species due to our actions, we lose many survival opportunities. Our fates are intertwined. This process, or something like it, is common to every group of people who evolve a general earth care ethic. Having developed an earth care ethic by assessing our best course for survival, we then turn to our relationships with others. Here, we observe a general rule of nature, that cooperative species and associations of self-supporting species, like mycorrhiza on tree roots, make healthy communities. Such lessons lead us to a sensible resolve to cooperate and take support roles in society to foster an interdependence, which values the individual's contributions rather than forms of opposition or competition. Although initially we can see how helping our family and friends assists us in our own survival, we may evolve the mature ethic that sees all humankind as family and all life as allied associations. Thus, we expand people care to species care, for all life has common origins. All are a family. We see how enlightened self-interest leads us to evolve ethics of sustainable and sensible behavior. These, then, are the ethics expressed in permaculture. Having evolved ethics, we can then devise ways to apply them to our lives, economies, gardens, land, and nature. This is what this book is about, the mechanisms of mature ethical behavior, or how to act to sustain the earth. There is more than one way to achieve permanence and stability in land or society. The peasant approach is well described by King VI for Old China. Here, people hauled nutrients from canals, cesspits, pathways, and forests to an annual grain culture. We could describe this as feudal permanence for its methods, period, and politics. People were bound to the landscape by unremitting toil and in service to a state or landlord. This leads eventually to famine and revolution. A second approach is on permanent pasture of prairie, pampas, and modern Western farms, where large holdings and few people create vast grazing leases, usually for a single species of animal. This is best described as baronial permanence, with continued on page 6, 3, A. Contemporary Western agriculture, year 1, B. Transitional and conservation farming, year 4, C. Permaculture, 70% cropland devoted to forage farming, figure 1.1, evolution from contemporary agriculture to A. Permaculture. I've attempted to cost contemporary agriculture against a changeover to permaculture over a period of 38 years, the transition period. Basic changes involve replacing animal forage grains with tree crop, increasing forest cover, adopting low to no tillage on remaining croplands, retrofitting the house for energy conservation, and producing some, if not all, fuel on the farm. Contemporary Western agriculture. Year 1. Transitional and conservation farming, 1415. Year C. Permaculture, 70% cropland devoted. Point 1. Continued annotations to the bar diagram, accounting the costs of farming. The accounting is in sections as follows. 1. Cash dollar accounting. Year 8. Barone, income from total product on the farm. Continued next page. 5 from page 3. Near regal properties of immense extent, working at the lowest possible level of land use, pasture or cropland is the least productive use of land we can devise. Such systems, once mechanized, destroy whole landscapes and soil complexes. They can then best be typified as agricultural deserts. Forests, not seen by industrial man as anything but wood, are another permanent agriculture. But they need generations of care and knowledge, and hence a tribal or communal reverence only found in stable communities. This, then, is the communal permanence many of us seek, to be able to plant a pecan or citrus when we are old, and to know it will not be cut down by our children's children. The further we depart from communal permanence, the greater the risk of tyranny, feudalism, and revolution, and the more work for less yield. Any error or disturbance can then bring disaster, as can a drought year in a desert grain crop or a distant political decision on tariffs. The real risk is that the needs of those people working on the ground, the inhabitants, are overthrown by the needs or greeds of commerce and centralized power, that the forest is cut for warships or newspaper, and we are reduced to serfs in a barren landscape. This has been the fate of peasant Europe, Ireland, and much of the Third World. The characteristic that typifies all permanent agricultures is that the needs of the system for energy are provided by that system. Modern crop agriculture is totally dependent on external energies, hence the oil problem and its associated pollution. Figure 1.1 is a very simple but sufficient illustration of the case I am making. Selected forests not only yield more than annual crops, but provide a diverse nutrient and fuel resource for such crops. Without permanent agriculture, there is no possibility of a stable social order. Thus, the move from productive permanent systems, where the land is held in common, to annual commercial agricultures, where land is regarded as a commodity, involves a departure. 6. From a low to a high energy society, the use of land in an exploitative way, and a demand for external energy resources mainly provided by the Third World. People think I am slightly crazy when I tell them to go home and garden, or not to involve themselves in broad-scale mechanized agriculture, but a little thought and reading will convince them that this is, in fact, the solution to many world problems. What is now possible is a totally new synthesis of plant and animal systems, using a post-industrial or even computerized approach to system design, applying the principles of whole system energy flows as devised by Odum 1971, and the principles of ecology as enunciated by Watt 13 and others. It is, in the vernacular, a whole new ballgame to devise permaculture systems for local, regional, and personal needs. Had we taught this approach from the beginning, we would all be in a stable and functional landscape, but our grandparents failed us, and perhaps for lack of time or information, set up the present and continuing misdesigned households, towns, and cities. The concept of free energy put the final nail in the coffin of common sense, community, and enabled materialistic societies to rob distant peoples, oblivious of the inevitable accounting to come. 1.3. Permaculture and landscape. And society, as the basis of permaculture, is beneficial design. It can be added to all other ethical training and skills, and has the potential of taking a place in all human endeavors. In the broad landscape, however, permaculture concentrates on already settled areas and agricultural lands. Almost all of these need drastic rehabilitation and rethinking. One certain result of using our skills to integrate food supply and settlement to catch water from our roof areas and to place nearby a zone of fuel forest which receives waste and supplies energy will be to free most of the area of the globe for the rehabilitation of natural systems. These need never be looked upon as of use to people, except in the very broad sense of global health. The real difference between a cultivated designed ecosystem and a natural system is that the great majority of species and biomass in the cultivated ecology is intended for the use of humans or their livestock. We are only a small part of the total primeval or natural species assembly, and only a small part of its yields are directly available to us. But in our own gardens, almost every plant is selected to provide or support some direct yield for people. Household design relates principally to the needs of people. It is thus human-centered, anthropocentric. This is a valid aim for settlement design, but we also need a nature-centered ethic for wilderness conservation. We cannot, however, do much for nature if we do not govern our greed, and if we do not supply our needs from our existing settlements. If we can achieve this aim, we can withdraw from much of the agricultural landscape and allow natural systems to flourish. Recycling of nutrients and energy in nature is a function of many species. In our gardens, it is our own responsibility to return wastes via compost or mulch to the soil and plants. We actively create soil in our gardens, whereas in nature many other species carry out that function. Around our homes we can catch water for garden use, but we rely on natural forested landscapes to provide the condenser leaves and clouds to keep rivers running with clean water, to maintain the global atmosphere, and to lock up our gaseous pollutants. Thus, even anthropocentric people would be well advised to pay close attention to, and to assist in, the conservation of existing forests and the rehabilitation of degraded lands. Our own survival demands that we preserve all existing species, and allow them a place to live. We have abused the land and laid waste to systems we need never have disturbed had we attended to our home gardens and settlements. If we need to state a set of ethics on natural systems, then let it be thus: implacable and uncompromising opposition to further disturbance of any remaining natural forests, where most species are still in balance, vigorous rehabilitation of degraded and damaged natural systems to stable states, unestablishment of plant systems for our own use on the least amount of land we can use for our existence, and establishment of plant and animal refuges for rare or threatened species. Permaculture as a design system deals primarily with the third statement above, but all people who act responsibly in fact subscribe to the first and second statements. That said, I believe we should use all the species we need or can find to use in our own settlement designs, providing they are not locally rampant and invasive. Whether we approve of it or not, the world about us continually changes. Some would want to keep everything the same, but history, paleontology, and common sense tells us that all has changed, is changing, will change. In a world where we are losing forests, species, and whole ecosystems, there are three concurrent and parallel responses to the environment. 1. Care for surviving natural assemblies to leave the wilderness to heal itself. 2. Rehabilitate degraded or eroded land using complex pioneer species and long-term plant assemblies, trees, shrubs, ground covers. 3. Create our own complex living environment with as many species as we can save or have need for, from wherever on Earth they come. We are fast approaching the point where we need refuges for all global life forms, as well as regional, national, or state parks for indigenous forms of plants and animals. While we see our local flora and fauna as native, we may also logically see all life as native to Earth. While we try to preserve systems that are still local and diverse, we should also build new or recombinant ecologies from global resources especially. In order to stabilize degraded lands, in your own garden, there are likely to be plants, animals, and soil organisms from every major landmass and many islands. Jet travel has merely accelerated a process already well established by continental drift, bird migration, wind transport, and the rafting of debris by water. Everything will, in time, either become extinct, spread more widely, or evolve to new forms. Each of these processes is happening at once, but the rate of extinction and exchange is accelerating. Rather than new species, adapted hybrids are arising, for example, as palms, seagrasses, and snails, and microorganisms from many continents meet, mix, and produce new accommodations to their new environments. The very chemistry of the air, soil, and water is in flux. Metals, chemicals, isotopes, gases, and plastics are loose on Earth that have never before been present, or never present in such form and quantity before we made it so. It is my belief that we have two responsibilities to pursue. Primarily, it is to get our house and garden, our place of living, in order so that it supports us. Secondarily, it is to limit our population on Earth, or we ourselves become the final plague. Both these duties are intimately connected, as stable regions create stable populations. If we do not get our cities, homes, and gardens in order so that they feed and shelter us, we must lay waste to all other natural systems. Thus, truly responsible conservationists have gardens which support their food needs and are working to reduce their own energy needs to a modest consumption, or to that which can be supplied by local. 7. Table 1.1 Permaculture Design. The result of a unique assembly of constructs, species, and social systems into a unique pattern suited to a specific site and set of occupants. Wind, water, forest, or solar power resources. We can work on providing biomass for our essential energy needs on a household and regional scale. It is hypocrisy to pretend to save forests, yet to buy daily newspapers and packaged food, to preserve native plants, yet rely on agrochemical production for food, and to adopt a diet which calls for broad-scale food production. Philosopher gardeners, or farmer poets, are distinguished by their sense of wonder and real feeling for the environment when religions cease to obliterate trees in order to build temples or human artifacts, and instead generalize love and respect to all living systems. As a witness to the potential of creation, they too will join the many of us now deeply appreciating the complexity and self-sustaining properties of natural systems, from whole universes to simple molecules. Gardener, scientist, philosopher, poet, and adherent of religions all can conspire in admiration of and reverence for this earth, We create our own life conditions, now and for the future. In permaculture, this means that all of us have some part in identifying, supporting, recommending, investing in, or creating wilderness habitats and species refuges. The practical way to proceed outside the home garden is to form or subscribe to institutes or organizations whose aims under their legal charter are to carry out conservation activities. While the costs are low, in sum total the effects are profound. Even the smallest garden can reserve off a few square meters of insect, lizard, frog, or butterfly habitat, while larger gardens and farms can fence off forest and wetland areas of critical value to local species. Such areas should be only for the conservation of local species. Permaculture as a design system contains nothing new. It arranges what was always there in a different way, so that it works to conserve energy or to generate more energy than it consumes. What is novel and often overlooked is that any system of total common sense design for human communities is revolutionary. Design is the key word of this book. Design in landscape, social, and conceptual systems, and design in space and time. I have attempted a treatment on the difficult subject of patterning, and have tried to order some complex subjects so as to make them accessible. The text is positivistic, without either the pretended innocence or the belief that everything will turn out right. Only if we make it so will this happen. As will be clear in other chapters of this book, the end result of the adoption of permaculture strategies in any country or region will be to dramatically reduce the area of the agricultural environment needed by the households and the settlements of people, and to release much of the landscape for the sole use of wildlife and for reoccupation by endemic flora. Respect for all life forms is a basic, and in fact essential, ethic for all people. 1.4 references. Lovelock J.E., Gaia, A New Look at Life on Earth, Oxford University Press, 1979. Odom Eugene, Fundamentals of Ecology, W.B. Saunders, Toronto, 1971. Thomas, Lewis, The Lives of a Cell, The Viking Press, Inc., 1974. 9. Chapter 2, Concepts and Themes, in Design. The world teeters on the threshold of revolution. If it is a bloody revolution, it is all over. The alternative is a design science revolution. Design science produces so much performance per unit of resource invested as to take care of all human needs. Buckminster Fuller. All living organisms are open systems. That is to say, they maintain their complex forms and functions through continuous exchanges of energies and materials with their environment. Instead of running down like a mechanical clock that dissipates its energy through friction, the living organism is constantly building up more complex substances from the substance it feeds on, more complex forms of energies from the energies it absorbs, and more complex patterns of information. Perceptions, feelings, thoughts form the input of its receptor organs. Arthur Koestler, 1967, The Ghost in the Machine. Most thermodynamic problems concern closed systems where the reactions take place in confinement and can be reversed. An example is the expansion and compression of gas in a cylinder. But in an open system, energy is gained or lost irreversibly, and the system, its environment, or both are changed by the interaction. The second law of thermodynamics states that energy tends to dissipate and organized systems drift inevitably towards entropy or chaos in seeming violation of that law. Biological systems tend to become increasingly complex and efficient. Newsweek, October 24, 1977, on the Nobel Prize, awarded to Ilya Prigozhin. Lovelock shows that the biosphere, or Gaia as he calls it, actually created those conditions that are required for its support and systematically builds up the stock of materials that it requires to move towards increasing complexity, diversity, and stability. Edward Goldsmith, 1981, Thermodynamics, or Ecodynamics, The Ecologist. Man did not weave the web of life. He is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. To harm the earth is to heap contempt upon the Creator, contaminate your bed, and you will one night suffocate in your own waste. Chief Seattle, 1854, responding to a U.S. government offer to buy Indian land. 2.1. Introduction. It is alarming that in Western society no popular body of directives has arisen to replace the injunctions of tribal taboo and myth. When we left tribal life, we left with it all guides to sensible behavior in the natural world, of which we are part and in which we live and die. More to the point, by never having the time or common sense to evolve new or current guiding directives, we have forgotten how to evolve self-regulating systems. Hence, the call for a society in which we are all designers, based on an ethical and applied education with a clear concept of life ethics. The Gaia hypothesis, as formulated by James Lovelock, is that the Earth less and less appears to behave like a material assembly and more appears to act as a thought process. Even in the inanimate world, we are dealing with a life force. And 10. Our acts are of great effect. The reaction of the Earth is to restore equilibrium and balance. If we maltreat, overload, deform, or deflect natural systems and processes, then we will get a reaction, and this reaction may have long-term consequences. Don't do anything unless you've thought out all its consequences and advantages. Aboriginal cultures used myth to show how unnecessary acts and unthinking destruction of elements brings about catastrophe and suffering. The usual structure of myth has these sequences. 1. A willful act of an individual or group. 2. A transmutation animate to inanimate, or the reverse. For example, Lot's wife turns into a pillar of salt. This is by way of a warning. 3. Invocation of an elemental force, fire, storm, earthquake, flood, tidal wave, plague, as a result of any set of willful acts. 4. Necessary atonement by suffering, isolation, migration, or death. So the act of a child or individual is given a meaning which relates to the whole of nature and rebounds on the society. Reared on such myths, we go carefully in the world, aware that every unthinking act can have awful consequences. Because we have replaced nature-based myth with a set of fixed prohibitions relating only to other people and unrelated to nature, we have developed destructive and people-centered civilizations and religions. In life and in design, we must accept that immutable rules will not apply, and instead be prepared to be guided on our continuing exploration by flexible principles and directives. Thus, this book emphasizes self-reliance, responsibility, and the functions of living things. Within a self-regulated system on Earth, energy from the sun can be trapped and stored in any number of ways. While the sun burns, we are in an open system. If we don't destroy the Earth, open system energy saving will see us evolve as conscious beings in a conscious universe. A policy of responsibility, to relinquish power. The role of beneficial authority is to return function and responsibility to life and to people. If successful, no. Further authority is needed. The role of successful design is to create a self-managed system. 2.2. Science and the Thousand, Names of God. Although we can observe nature, living systems do not lend themselves to strict scientific definition for two reasons. Firstly, life is always in process of change, and secondly, life systems react to investigation or experiments. We must always accept, therefore, that there will never be laws in the area of biology. Hard science, such as we apply to material systems, physics, mathematics, inorganic chemistry, studiously avoids life systems, regarding as not quite respectable those sciences, botany, zoology, psychology, which try to deal with life. Rigorous scientific method deals with the necessity of rigorous control of variables, and in a life system, or indeed any system, this presumes two things that are impossible. 1. That you know all variables in order to control some of them and measure others before you start, or 2. That you can in fact control all or indeed any variables without creating disorder in the life system. Every experiment is carried out by people, and the results are imparted to people. Thus, living things conduct and impart knowledge. To ignore life in the system studied, one has to ignore oneself. Life exists in conditions of flux, not imposed control, and responds to any form of control in a new fashion. Living things respond to strict control, either by removal of stimuli or by constant input of stimuli, by becoming uncontrolled, or, in the case of people and rats at least, by dysfunction or by going mad. Experiments, therefore, are not decisive, rigid, or true findings, but an eternal search for the variables that have not been accounted for previously. This is the equivalent of true believers. In their empirical approach to the knowledge of God's name, they simply keep chanting variables of all possible names until perhaps they hit on the right one. Thus does science proceed in biological experiments. Scientists who know and observe don't usually apply their knowledge in the world. Those who act often don't know or observe. This has resulted in several tragic conditions where productive natural ecosystems have been destroyed to create unproductive cultivated systems, breaking every sane environmental principle to do so. Energy-efficient animals, deer, kangaroo, fish, have been displaced by inefficient animal systems, sheep, cattle. Every widespread modern agricultural system needs great energy inputs. Most agriculture destroys basic resources and denies future yields. As Edward Goldsmith makes clear, thermodynamics or ecodynamics, The Ecologist 1982-1, many scientists refuse to consider the function of life in such systems. Natural systems disintegrate and decay, producing more and more helpless plants, animals, and people, and the state or the farmer takes over the function of natural processes. The state becomes the father of the orphan child, the farmer the father of the orphan chicken. It is only by returning self-regulating function and responsibility to living things such as people that a stable life system can evolve. Scientific method is one of the ways to know about the real world, the world we are part of and live in. Observation and contemplative understanding is another. We can find out about many things, both living and inorganic, by timing, measuring, and 11. Observing them enough to make calendars, computers, clocks, meters, and rulers, but not ever enough to understand the complex actions in even a simple living system. You can hit a nail on the head, or cause a machine to do so, and get a fairly predictable result. Hit a dog on the head, and it will either dodge, bite back, or die, but it will never again react in the same way. We can predict only those. things we set up to be predictable, not what we encounter in the real world of living and reactive processes. Ecologists and whole systems, people struggle to understand open and complex systems, even though they realize that they too are a part of the system they study. In fact, given enough limnologists, those who study freshwater lakes and lake organisms, these become the most important factor in the spread of lake organisms via their boats, boots, and nets. It is also time, I feel, for students of communities to form a community of students of communities and keep out of everybody else's hair. Overseas aid is perilously close to being a very good reason for overseas aid to be necessary as spies need. Counter spies. I shudder to think that if we train more brain surgeons, they must cut open more brains in order to support themselves. Imagine. I think it fair to say that if you submit to poverty, you equip yourself to know about poverty, and the same goes for lobotomy. There are several ways not to face life: by taking drugs, watching television, becoming a fakir in a cave, or reading in pure science. All are an abdication of personal responsibility for life on earth, including of course one's own life. Value and ethic-free lifestyles are as aberrant in science as in society. It is the quantifiability of many scientific concepts that have led to their adoption by scientists, often regardless of the fact that, as they are defined, they correspond to nothing whatsoever in the world of living things. E. Goldsmith, 1981, Thermodynamics or Ecodynamics, The Ecologist. Perverse planning is everywhere, obvious. Houses face not the sun, but rather the road. Lawns replace gardens, and trees are planted to be pruned and tended. Make work is the rule, and I suspect that most theoretical scientists inhabit demented domestic environments, just as many psychiatrists are inhabitants of mental institutions. Scientific and non-scientific groups or individuals can make progress in finding solutions to specific problems. The following approaches do very well. Designers, please note: 1. Improving tools or inventing new tools for specific jobs. 2. Collecting a large set of observations on occurrences or samples of a set of phenomena and sorting them on the basis of likeness and likeness by establishing systems and system boundaries, categories, and keys to systems. This 12 process often reveals common characteristics of diverse elements and leads to an understanding of common traits, suggesting by analogy strategies in design. 3. Insight, the aha or eureka. Response to observation. This, as is well recorded, comes to the individual as though by special gift or providence. In fact, it is quite probably the end point off too. 4. Trials. Give it a try and see if it works. This empirical approach simply eliminates those things that don't work. It does not necessarily establish how or why something works, or even if it works in the long run. 5. Guessing. The best guesses are based on trials that are already known to work. 6. Observing unique events and taking note of them. The discovery of penicillin. 7. Accident. Trials set up for one reason work in a way not predicted or foreseen. Compounds made for one purpose are applied to another. 8. Imitation, by testing already known effects discovered by others. 9. Patterning, by seeing a pattern to events of often very different natures, and thus producing insights into underlying effects, often preceded by 2. Above, but rare in science. 10. Common sense, often called management in business and natural systems control. This consists of staying with and steering a system or enterprise through constant adjustment to a successful conclusion, or result. It also suits evolving systems, and is the basis of continuous change and adjustment. 2.3. Applying laws and principles to design. Principles differ from dogmas in that there are no penalties for error, but only learning from error, which leads to a new evolution. Dogmas are rules which are intended to force centralized control, often by guilt, and it is obvious that every such rule or law represents a failure of the social system. It is too late to fail, but never too late to adopt sensible principles for our guidance and to throw away the rule book. Life intervention principle in chaos lies unparalleled opportunity for imposing creative order. Just join with 1 or 2 friends to make your way in the confusion. Others will follow and learn. There is only one law that is offered to us by such education as we derive from nature, and that is the law of return, which can be stated in many ways. Law of return. Whatever we take, we must return, or nature demands a return for every gift received, or the user must pay. We should examine and act on the forms of this law. It is the reason why this book carries a tree tax, that we may be able to continue in the use of books. It is why we must never buy books or newspapers that do not tax, nor goods where the manufacturer does not recycle or replant the materials of the manufacturer. It is why we must carefully study how to use our wastes, and this includes our body wastes. Put in the form of a directive or policy statement, this law would read: every object must responsibly provide for its replacement. Society must, as a condition of use, replace an equal or greater resource than that used. Inherent in such a law are the concepts of replanting, recycling, durability, and the correct or beneficial disposal of wastes. Nature has extreme penalties for those who break such laws and for their descendants. And neighbors, nor can we deny imminence if a landscape delights us. We should not insult it with castles on peaks, roadways, and clear cuts. We should return the pleasure we get from natural prospects and maintain their integrity. It would be pleasant indeed were the land around us always to appear welcoming or non-threatening. This effect, too, can be created or destroyed. There is no reason not to bury our necessary constructs in earth or clothe them with vegetation. If we want pleasure in life, then we should preserve the life around us. Energies enter a system and either remain or escape. Our work as permaculture designers is to prevent energy leaving before the basic needs of the whole system are satisfied, so that growth, reproduction, and maintenance continue in our living. Components. All permaculture designers should be aware of the fundamental principles that govern natural systems. These are not immutable rules, but can be used as a set of directives, taking each case as unique but gaining confidence and inspiration from a set of findings and solutions in other places and other times. We can use the guiding principles and laws of natural systems, as formulated by such people as Watt, Odum, and Birch, and apply some of them to our consciously designed ecologies. One such law is the basic law of thermodynamics, as restated by Watt 13. All energy entering an organism, population, or ecosystem can be accounted for as energy which is stored or leaves. Energy can be transferred from one form to another, but it cannot disappear or be destroyed or created. No energy conversion system is ever completely efficient. As stated by Asimov 1970, the total energy of the universe is constant, and the total entropy is increasing. Entropy is bound or dissipated energy. It becomes unavailable for work or not useful to the system. It is the waters of a mountain stream that have reached the sea. It is the heat, noise, and exhaust smoke that an automobile emits while traveling. It is the energy of food used to keep an animal warm, alive, and mobile. Thus, ambient and useful energy storages are degraded into less useful forms until they are no longer of any use to our system. The question for the designer becomes, how can I best use energy before it passes from my site or system? Our strategy is to set up an interception net from source to sink. This net is a compound web of life and technologies and is designed to catch and store as much energy as possible on its way to increasing entropy, as in Figure 2.1. Therefore, we designed to catch and store as much water as possible from the hills before it ends up at its sink in the Quiet Valley Lake. If we made no attempt to store or use it as it passes through our system, we would suffer drought, have to import it from outside our system, or use energy to pump it back uphill. Although the material world can perhaps be predictably measured at least over a wide range of phenomena by applications of the laws of thermodynamics, these relate mainly to non-living or experimentally closed systems. The concept of entropy is not necessarily applicable to those living open Earth systems with which we are involved and in which we are immersed. Such laws are more useful in finding an effective path through material technologies than through a life-complex world. The key word in open systems is exchange. For example, on the local level, cities appear to be open, but as they return little energy to the systems that supply them and pass on. Their waste as pollutants to the sea they are not in exchange, but in a localized one-way trade with respect to their food resource. All cities break the basic law of return. Life systems constantly organize and create complex storages from diffuse energy and materials, accumulating, decomposing, building, and transforming them for further use. We can use these effects in the design process by finding pathways or routes by which life systems convert diffuse materials into those of most use. For example, if we have a waste such as manure, we can leave it on a field, although this is of productive use. We have only achieved one function. Alternatively, we can route it through a series of transformations that give us a variety of resources. First, we can ferment it and distill it to alcohol, and secondly, route the waste through a biogas digester, where anaerobic organisms convert it to methane, used as a cooking or heating gas, or as fuel for vehicles. Thirdly, the liquid effluent can be sent to fields, and the 13 Figure 2.1, designing to catch and store energy. The designer's work is to set up useful energy storages in a landscape or building proceeding from state A to state B. Such storages available for increasing yields are called resources. 14. Solid sludge fed to worms, which convert it to rich horticultural soil. Fourthly, the worms themselves can be used to feed fish or poultry. Birch states 6 principles of natural systems. 1. Nothing in nature grows forever. There is a constant cycle of decay and rebirth. 2. Continuation of life depends on the maintenance of the global biogeochemical cycles of essential elements, in particular carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur, and phosphorus. Thus, we need to cycle these and other minor nutrients to stimulate growth and to keep the atmosphere and waters of Earth unpolluted. 3. The probability of extinction of populations or a species is greatest when the density is very high or very low. Both crowding and too few individuals of a species may result in reaching thresholds of extinction. 4. The chance that species have to survive and reproduce is dependent primarily upon one or two key factors in the complex web of relations of the organism to its environment. If we can determine what these critical factors are, we can exclude by design some limiting factors, for example frost, and increase others, for example shelter, nest, sites. 5. Our ability to change the face of the earth increases at a faster rate than our ability to foresee the consequence of such change, hence the folly of destroying life systems for short-term profit. 6. Living organisms are not only means but ends. In addition to their instrumental value to humans and other living organisms, they have intrinsic worth. This is the life ethic thesis so often missing from otherwise ethical systems. Although these principles are basic and inescapable, what we as designers have to deal with is survival on a particular site, here and now. Thus, we must study whether the resources and energy consumed can be derived from renewable or non-renewable resources, and how non-renewable resources can best be used to conserve and generate energy in living renewable systems. Fortunately for us, the long-term energy derived from the sun is available on Earth and can be used to renew our resources if life systems are carefully constructed and preserved. There are thus several practical design considerations to observe. The systems we construct should last as long as possible and take least maintenance. These systems, fueled by the sun, should produce not only their own needs, but the needs of the people creating or controlling them. Thus, they are sustainable, as they sustain both themselves and those who construct them. We can use energy to construct these systems, providing that in their lifetime they store or conserve more energy than we use to construct them or to maintain them. The following are some design principles that have been distilled for use in permaculture. 1. Work with nature rather than against IT. We can assist rather than impede natural elements, forces, pressures, processes, agencies, and evolutions. In natural successions, grasses slowly give way to shrubs, which eventually give way to trees. We can actively assist this natural succession not by slashing out weeds and pioneers, but by using them to provide microclimate, nutrients, and wind protection for the exotic or native species we want to establish. If we throw nature out the window, she comes back. In the door with a pitchfork, Masanobu Fukuoka, for example, if we spray for pest infestations, we end up destroying both pests and the predators that feed on them, so the following year we get an explosion of pests because there are no predators to control them. Consequently, we spray more heavily, putting things further out of balance. Unfortunately, all the pests are never killed, and the survivors breed more resistant. Progeny, nature's pitchfork. 2. The problem is the solution, everything, works both ways. It is only how we see things that makes them advantageous or not. If the wind blows cold, let us use both its strength and its coolness to advantage. For example, funneling wind to a wind generator, or directing cold winter wind to a cool cupboard in a heated house. A corollary of this principle is that everything is a positive resource. It is up to us to work out how we may use it as such. A designer may recognize a specific site characteristic as either a problem or as a unique feature capable of several uses, for example, jagged rock outcrops. Such features can only become problems when we have already decided on imposing a specific site pattern that the rock outcrop interferes with. It is not a problem and may be an asset if we accept it for the many values it possesses. The problem is the solution is a Mollisonism, implying that only our fixed attitudes are problems when dealing with things like rock outcrops. A friend has included several natural boulders in her home with excellent physical, aesthetic, and economic benefit. The builder would have removed them as problems at great expense. 3. Make the least change for the greatest possible effect. For example, when choosing a dam site, select the area where you get the most water for the least amount of earth moved. 4. The yield of a system is theoretically unlimited. The only limit on the number of uses of a resource possible within a system is in the limit of the information and the imagination of the designer. If you think you have fully planted an area, almost any other innovative designer can see ways to add a vine, a fungus, a beneficial insect, or can see a yield potential that has been ignored. Gahan Gilfetter at the Garden of Eden in Australia found an unsuspected market for cherimoya seed, required by nurseries as seed stock for 15. Grafting. This made a resource from a waste product derived from damaged fruit. 5. Everything gardens. A Mollisonian principle is that everything makes its own garden, or everything has an effect on its environment. Rabbits make burrows and defecation mounds, scratch out roots, create short swords or lawns, and also creates the conditions favorable for weeds such as thistles. People build houses, dispose of sewage, dig up soils for gardens, and maintain annual vegetable patches. We can use the rabbit directly as food to help in fire control, to prepare soil for thistles, cardoons, and globe artichokes, and to shelter many native animal species in their abandoned burrows. Rabbits maintain species-rich moorland sward suited to many orchids and other small plants. It is a matter of careful consideration as to where this rabbit, and ourselves, belong in any system, and if we should control or manage their effects or tolerate them. When we examine how plants and animals change ecosystems, we may find many allies in our efforts to sustain ourselves and other species. See Figure 2.2, 2.4 resources. The energies coming into our system are such natural forces as sun, wind, and rain. Living components and some technological or non-living units built into the system translate the incoming energies into useful reserves, which we can call resources. Some of these resources have to be used by the system for its own purposes. Stocks of fish must be maintained to produce more fish. An ideal technology should at the very least fuel itself. The surplus over and above these system needs is our yield. Yield, then, is any useful resource surplus to the needs of the local system and thus available for use, export, or trade. The way to obtain yield is to be conservative in resource use. For energy, like money, is much more easily saved than generated. Resource saving involves recycling waste, insulating against heat loss, etc. Then, we can work out paths or routes to send resources on to their next use point. If the aim of functional design is to obtain yields, or to provide a surplus of resources, it is as well to be clear about just what it is that we call a resource, and what categories of resource there are, as these latter may affect our strategies of use. In short, we cannot use all resources in the same way and to the same ends. Ethics of resource use are evolved by knowing about the results of resource exploitation. Forests, soils, air, water, sunlight, and seeds are resources that we all regard as part of a common heritage. A second category of resource is that which belong to us as group, family, or person, those fabricated, ordered, or otherwise developed resources that people create by their work, and of which a presence or 16. Absence does not apparently affect the common resource. What we create, however, is always made from the common resource, so that it is impossible to draw a line between these categories. What other ways can we look at resources? Let us try a use and results approach. What happens if we use some resources, if we look upon them as a yield? We then find that a response, or result, follows. Resources are 1. Those which increase by modest use. Green browse is an example. If deer do not browse shrubs, the latter may become woody and unpalatable. Also, a browsed biennial unable to flower may tiller out and become perennial. For example, the fireweed erecthites nibbled by wallaby in Tasmania. Seedling trees can be maintained at browse height, but if ungrazed, escape to unbrowsable height and shade out other palatable plants. Overgrazing may, by damage, cause extinction of palatable selected browse and browsers, but underbrowsing may cause similar effects. Information is another resource that can increase with use. It withers or is outdated if not used. Too little impoverishes a system, but when freely used and exchanged, it flourishes and increases. 2. Those unaffected by use. In impalpable terms, a view or a good climate is unaffected by use. In palpable terms, the diversion of a part of a river to hydroelectric generation or irrigation, the water returned to the stream after use, is also unaffected, as is a stone pile as mulch, heat store, or water runoff collector. A well-managed ecosystem is an example of resources unaffected by use. 3. Those which disappear or degrade if not used. For example, an unharvested crop of an annual, or a grass which could be stored for the winter, eruptions of oceanic fish, swarms of bees or grasshoppers, ripe fruit, and water runoff during rains. 4. Those reduced by use. For example, a fish or game stock unwisely used, clay deposits, mature forests, and coal and oil. 5. Those which pollute or destroy other resources if used, such as residual poisons in an ecosystem, radioactive superhighways, large buildings or areas of concrete, and sewers running pollutants to the sea. Categories 1 to 3 are those most commonly produced in natural systems and rural living situations, and are the only sustainable basis of society. Categories 4 and 5 are as a result of urban and industrial development, and if not used to produce permanent beneficial changes to the ecosystem, become pollutants. Some are permanent pollutants in terms of the lifetimes of people. It follows that a sane society manages resources categories 1 to 4 wisely, bans the use of resource category 5, and regulates all uses to produce sustainable yield. This is called resource management, and has been successfully applied to some fish and animal populations, but seldom to our own lives. Investment. Priorities can be decided on the same criteria, at both the national and household level. Policy of resource management. A responsible human society bans the use of resources which permanently reduce yields of sustainable resources, for example, pollutants, persistent poisons, radioactives, large areas of concrete and highways, sewers from city to sea. Failure to do this will cause the society itself to fail, so that programs of highway building and city, expansion, the release of persistent biocides, and loss of soil will bring any society down more surely and permanently than war itself. Immoral governments tolerate desertification and land salting, concreted highways and city sprawl, which take more good land permanently out of life production than the loss of territory to a conqueror. Immorality of this nature is termed progress and growth to confuse the ignorant and to supplant local self-reliance for the temporary ends of centralized power. The key principle to wise resource use is the principle of enough. This is basic to understand. Figure 2.2 Everything Gardens. A. Pruning. B. Digging. C. Mowing. D. Typical plant assembly for species. Some species are Ortolagus, Cuniculus, Macropus, Gallus, Chirina, and Homo sapiens at work in their fields. Plants developed by each species are maintained in similar deflection states as lawns, pruned trees, flat weeds, and characteristic herbage around dwellings. 17. Societies in chaos or systems in disorder. Today, superhighways and overpasses in Massachusetts alone need some $400 billion to repair, and the collapsing sewer systems of London and New York some $80 billion. Neither Massachusetts, London, nor New York can raise this money, which shows that an unthinking historical development strategy can cripple a future society. Today's luxuries are tomorrow's disasters. Principle of disorder: any system or organism can accept only that quantity of a resource which can be used productively. Any resource input beyond that point throws the system or organism into disorder. Oversupply of a resource is a form of chronic pollution. Both an over- and undersupply of resources have much the same effect, except that oversupply has more grotesque results in life systems than undersupply. To a degree, undersupply can be coped with by reduced growth and a wider spacing or dispersal of organisms, but oversupply of a resource can cause inflated growth, crowding, and sociopathy in social organisms. In people, both gross over- and undernutrition are common. Ethical resource management is needed to balance out the pathologies of famine and obesity. 2.5 Yields. Yields can be thought of in immediate, palpable, and material ways and are fairly easily measured as 1. Product yield, the sum of primary and derived products available from, or surplus to, the system. Some of these are intrinsic or precede design, others are created by design. 2. Energy yield, the sum of conserved, stored, and generated energy surplus to the system, again, both intrinsic and those created by design. Impalpable yields are those related to health and nutrition, security, and a satisfactory social context and lifestyle. Not surprisingly, it is the search for these invisible yields that most often drives people to seek good design or to take up life on the land. For what does it benefit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul? Thus, we see the invisible yields in terms of values and ethics. This governs our concept of needs and sets the limits of enough. Here, we see an ethical basis as a vital component of yield. Although all systems have a natural or base yield depending on their productivity, our concern in permaculture is that this essential base yield is sustainable. Several factors now operate to reduce the yield of natural systems. In the simplest form, this is the overuse of energy in degenerative systems due to the unwise application of fossil fuel energy. Poisoning by unproductive use is observable and widespread. 18. Thus we must concentrate on productive use, which implies that the energy used is turned into biological growth and held as basic living material in the global ecosystem. Unused, wasted, or frivolously used. Resources are energies running wild, which creates chaos, destroys basic resources, and eventually abolishes all yield or surplus. In design terms, we can find yields from those living populations or resources, which are the stocks of the biologist, the so-called standing crop, or from non-living systems such as the climatic elements, chemical energy, and machine technology. There is energy stored by extinct life as coal, oil, and gas, energy left over from the formation of the Earth as geothermal energy, tides, and electromagnetic and gravitational forces. Cosmic and solar energies impinge on the Earth, and life intercepts these flows to make them available for life forms. In our small part of the system, the design site, our work is to store, direct, conserve, and convert to useful forms those energies that exist on or pass through the site. The total sum of our strategy, in terms of surplus energy usefully stored, is the system yield of design. Definition of system yield. System yield is the sum total of surplus energy produced by, stored, conserved, reused, or converted by the design. Energy is in surplus once the system itself has available all its needs for growth, reproduction, and maintenance. Some biologists may define yield or production in more narrow terms, accepting that a forest, lake, or crop has a finite upper limit of surplus due to substrate conditions and available energy. We do not have to accept this, as it is a passive approach, inapplicable to active and conscious design or active management using, for example, fertilizers, windbreaks, or selected. Species. Even more narrowly defined is the yield of. Agricultural economists who regard a single product, peaches, as the yield. It may be this approach itself which is the true limit to yield. A true accounting of yield takes into consideration both upstream cost energy and downstream cost health. The product yield may create problems of pollution and soil mineral loss and cost more than it can replace. The very concept of surplus yield supposes either flow through or growth within our system. Coal and rock do not have yield in this sense. They have a finite or limited product. Only life and flow can yield continually, or as long as they persist. Thus, the energy stocks of any system are the flows and lives within it. The flow may exist without life, as on the moon, where only technology can intervene to obtain a yield, but on Earth at least, life is the intervening strategy for capturing flow and producing yield. And technology depends on the continuation of life, not the opposite. The role of life in yield. Living things, including people, are the only effective intervening systems to capture resources on this planet and to produce a yield. Thus, it is the sum and capacity of life forms which decide total system yield and surplus. We have long been devising houses, farms, and cities which are energy demanding, despite a known set of strategies and techniques, all well tried, which could make these systems energy producing. It has long been apparent this condition is deliberately and artificially maintained by utilities, bureaucracies, and governments who are composed of those so dependent on the consumption and sale of energy resources that, without this continuing exploitation, they themselves would perish. In permaculture, we have abundant strategies under the following broad categories, which can create yields instead of incurring costly inputs or energy supply. Strategies that create yields: physical environmental, the creation of a niche in space, the provision of a design, critical resource, the rehabilitation and creation of soils, the diversion of water and water recycling, the integration of structures and landscape, biological, the selection of low-maintenance cultivars and species for a particular site, investigation of other species for usable yields, supplying key nutrients, biological waste recycling, mulch, manure, the assembly of beneficial and cooperative guild of plants and animals, spatial and configurational, annotation of units, functions, and species. Annotation is a design or pattern strategy of nesting or stacking one thing within another, like a bowl in a bowl, or a vine in a tree. Tessellation of units, functions, and species. Tessellation is the forming or arranging of a mosaic of parts. Innovative spatial geometry of designs as edge and harmonics, routing of materials or energy to next best use, and zone, sector, slope, orientation, and site strategies. Chapter 3, use of special patterns to suit irrigation, crop, systems, or energy conservation. Temporal and sequential annodation, interplant, intercrop, increasing cyclic frequency, tessellation of cycles and successions, as in browsing sequences. Technical, use of appropriate and rehabilitative technology, design of energy-efficient structures. Conservation, routing of resources to next best use, then recycling at the highest level. Safe storage of food product, no tillage or low tillage, cropping. Creation of very durable systems and objects, storage of runoff water for extended use. Cultural, removing cultural barriers to resource use, making unusual resources acceptable, on expanding choices in a culture. Legal, administrative, use. Removing socio-legal impediments to resource, creating effective structures to aid resource management, costing and adjusting systems for all energy inputs and outputs, social and cooperative endeavors, pooling of resources, sharing, financial recycling within the community, unpositive action to remove and replace impeding, systems, making harmonious connections between components and subsystems, making choices as to where we place things or how we live, observing, managing, and directing systems, applying information. This approach to potential production is beyond that of product yield alone. It is theoretically unlimited in its potential, for system yield results from the number of strategies applied, what connections are made, and what information is applied to a particular design. Now we see that yield in design is not some external, fixed, immutable quantity limited by circumstances that previously existed, but results from our behavior, knowledge, and the application of our intellect, skill, and comprehension. These can either limit or liberate the concept of yield. Thus, the profound difference between permaculture design and nature is that in permaculture we actively intervene to supply missing elements and to guide system evolution, limits to yield. Yield is not a fixed sum in any design system. It is the measure of the comprehension, understanding, and ability of the designers and managers of that design. Defined in this way, yield has no known limits, as we cannot know all ways to conserve, store, and save energy, nor can we fail to improve any system we build and observe. There is always room for another plant, another cycle, another route, another arrangement, another technique or structure. We can thus continually shrink the area we need to survive. The critical yield strategy is in governing our own appetites. 19%. Just as we can increase yield, so we can decrease it. The perverse aims of some politicians, developers, and even religious dogmatists limit yield by disallowing certain products as a yield. Just as one's neighbors may refuse the snail and eat the lettuce, refuse the blackbird and eat the strawberry, so we may only allow certain types of toilets or certain plants in gardens or parks. and thus people are the main impediment to using their potential yields. Farm strategies, categories, and examples. If we take as a condition the fence post to fence post grasslands or crops now developing in the Western world and apply the strategies given, then yields will increase. How these systems interact raises yield even more, but on their own they are sufficiently impressive. Water storage, 12 to 20% of landscape. 1. Product increase, for example, animal protein production. Water is more productive per unit area than land fish, more efficient at food conversion than cattle. 2. Product increase on land remaining due to irrigation and water, nutrient quality from, for example, fish manure. 3. Interaction, for example, ducks on water to increase yields in and around ponds, for example, pest and weed control, manure. 4. Microclimatic buffering due to water bodies. See Chapter 5, Climatic Factors. Landforming, 1. Product increase due to even irrigation, no dry areas, or waterlogging. 2. Land stability due to reduction of soil loss from water runoff or salting. 3. Gravity flow replaces pumped water, depends on site. 4. Recycling of water possible. Soil reconditioning. 1. Product increase due to deeper root penetration. 2. Water infiltration, zero runoff due to absorption. 3. Buffering of soil microclimate. See Chapter 8. Soils. 4. Supply of essential nutrients. Establishing of windbreak and forage forest, 20 to 30% of landscape. 1. Shelter effects, for example, increase in plant yields, animal protein, and microclimate buffering both above and below ground. 2. Increase in carrying capacity due to shrub and tree forage. 3. Savings on nutrients recycled via legumes and trees. 4. Intrinsic products of the forest, for example, nectar honey, seeds, firewood from fallen timber. 5. Insect and bird escapement and pest predator. Habitat. 6. Wildlife corridors. Selective farm reforestation, not industrial forestry. 1. Increased precipitation due to night condensation. Water penetration, see Chapter 6, Trees and their energy transactions. 2. Product increase due to superiority of perennials over annuals in bulk, energy savings, and length of yield figure, 1.1. 3. Increase in rainfall due to trees, cross, wind, see Chapter 6. 4. Reduced cost and increased capacity due to selected self-forage browse, for example, drought-proof stock feed, medicinal qualities of some perennial plants. 5. Reduced cost due to on-farm durable timber, for example, fence posts, construction material. 6. Reduced carcass loss due to shivering, sweating, exposure. 7. Increased crop production in sheltered areas. 8. Increased carcass weight due to increased food intake in sheltered conditions, not the same as 6. Above that is on hot days, cattle will graze all day when they are on shaded pasture instead of sheltering from the sun. 9. Reduced evaporation from ponds due to less wind over water surfaces, see Chapter 5. Market and process strategies. 1. Selected crop for specialty market for price. Increase, for example, fresh herbs near a concentration of restaurants. 2. Marketing by self-pick, mail order, direct, dispatch, wayside sale. 3. Processing to a higher order of product, for example, seed to oil. 4. Processing to refined order, for example, crude eucalyptus oil to fractions. 5. Money saved by processing fuels on farm plus sale of surplus fuel. Social, financial. 1. Market stability gained by farm link strategy, where an urban group contracts to buy specific produce from the farmer. 2. Income from field days and educational courses. 3. Rental or income from urban visitors, for example, a guest, house, or holiday farm. 4. Direct investment by city people in a particular farm. 5. Formation of a local credit union and bank for the district, thus recycling money locally. 6. Vehicle and implement pool with neighbors, schedules of sowing and reaping worked out, capital, save 90%. 7. Labor exchange with neighbors. 8. Produce and marketing cooperatives. Crop techniques. 1. Low or no tillage farming saves energy and reduced tillage and soil, water reduces evaporation and time between crops. 20. To put these into practical terms, I have culled from an interview with a farmer, Norm Sims, Weekly Times, 5, January 1983, statements on savings due to some site strategies applied. On landforming, we expect to double production over the next few years. Using half the irrigation water's 4 times benefit, salinity is reduced. In severe drought, pasture production has never looked better and water is available. It took us 6 days to irrigate what we now do in 2, and rather than restricting watering intervals, we are restricting the area, aiming to milk 185 cows on 24 hectares. On grazing rotation and electric fencing, 26 paddocks are grazed in a 21-day rotation, average field of 1.6 hectares, each with a trough water point for cattle. Here, there are these specific strategies in use: laser leveling of fields for even irrigation, water reticulation, water storage and recycling, grazing rotation off 21 days, central access road, crop for concentrated rations grown, and pasture area reduced to give best watering regime. It seems obvious from the foregoing that the primary, and certain increases in crop yield do not just come from varietal selections, a fiction promulgated by agricultural companies, seed patent holders, agricultural researchers, or extension officers, but from attention to site design and development, followed by wise enterprise selection to suit the modified site, concurrently with a marketing and processing strategy. As these are often permanent or durable strategies, it is not in the commercial interest to encourage them, as the continuous benefit is to the farmer alone, and the role of middlemen and traders is reduced. But, in the Western world, the 4 to 6% of us in essential production are in fact enslaved, while the remaining 96% are deriving secondary or tertiary benefits without adequate return to the primary producers. This can only result in a weak economy, waste, and irresponsibility for life existence, based on the expectation that the world owes politicians, students, and middlemen a living. Benefits, like wastes, must be returned or recycled to keep any system going. Accumulations of unused benefits are predictive of a collapse at production level, thence throughout all tiers of the system. Extending yields the concentration of yields into one short period is a fiscal, not an environmental or subsistence strategy, and has resulted in a feast and famine regime in markets and fields, and consequent high storage costs. Our aim should be to disperse food yield over time so that many products are available at any season. This aim is achieved in permaculture in a variety of ways, by selection of early, mid, and late season varieties, by planting the same variety in early or late ripening situations, by selection of varieties that yield over a long season. That by a general increase in diversity in the system. So, leaf, fruit, seed, and root are all product yields. By using self-storing species such as tubers, hard seeds, fuelwood, or rhizomes, which can be cropped on. Demand. By techniques such as preserving, drying, pitting, and cool storage. By regional trade between communities, or by the utilization of land at different altitudes or latitudes. Yields and storage, how yields endure is important, for there are unlimited opportunities to use durable yields in terms of season or lifetime. By a series of preservation strategies, food can be stored for days, weeks, or years. Water, not open to evaporation and pollution, or with natural cleansing organisms, will keep indefinitely. Shelters may outlast the forests that build them, or can be made of living or durable materials such as ivy, concrete, or stone. Energy alone, like the food which is part of energy, is difficult to store. Batteries leak or decay, heat escapes, and insulation breaks down. Only living things like forests increase their energy store. Because of seasonal or diurnal cycles, we should pay close attention to storage strategies. Very little famine would occur could grains, fish, and fruit available in good times be stored for lean times. The strategies of food storage are critical. I believe that people should therefore mulch their recipe books, which often specify out-of-season or not-in-garden foods, and replace them with books that stress either low-energy methods of food preservation or how to live easily from your garden in season. Cultural impediments to yield. I confess to a rare problem, gynekenophobia, or the fear of women falling on me, but this is a rather mild illness compared with many affluent suburbanites, who have developed an almost total zoophobia, or fear of anything that moves. It is, as any traveler can confirm, a complaint best developed in the affluent North American, and seems to be part of blue toilet dyes, air fresheners, lots of paper tissues, and 2 showers a day. It is very difficult, almost taboo, to talk of using rabbits, quail, pigs, poultry, or cows in city farms or urban gardens in the United States. They are commonplace city farm animals in England and are ordinary village animals in Asia. Australians feel no repulsion towards them, and the edible guinea pig lives comfortably in the homes of South Americans. But in the USA, no. Useful animals are effectively abolished from American cities, leaving the field wide open for a host of others. Pigeons forage the streets, thousands of gulls. 21. Defecate in New York City reservoirs, fresh from the garbage piles. Gigantic garbage bins are tipped over by large flea-ridden dogs in Los Angeles. Rats, half the size of dogs and also flea-ridden, are waiting for the garbage left by the dogs and have tunneled under the bus stops in their millions in Washington, D.C., not far from the White House. They in turn are stalked by mangy cats, who also keep a desultory eye on the billions of cockroaches crawling in most houses, not to mention the flies. We will omit the legendary albino alligators of the sewers and the rejected boa constrictors that pop up in the blue rinse toilets. So much wasted food breeds its own population of pests. A sensible rerouting of edible garbage through a herd of pigs or a legion of guinea pigs would abolish much of this nuisance, and a few good Asian restaurants could deal with the cats and dogs. The gulls would starve if chickens were fed on household wastes, and the besieged American might add a very large range of foods to those now available in cities. I mention this only to show that cultural prejudices can grossly reduce the available food resources, and that if we refuse to take sensible actions, some gross results can follow, with the biomass of useful foragers such as domesticated animals replaced by an equivalent biomass of pests. Maximum product yield concept, the big pumpkin fallacy. In a fluctuating climatic and market environment, the concept of forcing a maximum product yield is courting disaster. This is, however, the whole impetus of selling. For example, the big pumpkin and giant new variety advertisements in seed catalogs or in prizes awarded at agricultural shows. Better by far are more crop mixes and fail-safe systems that can produce in most conditions, wet or dry, cold or hot, or that hold constant value as subsistence potato, taro, arrowroot, or have special value vanilla, quinine, bamboo, or high food value per volume fish, chicken. The factors which can increase product yield are these: genetic selection, increased fertilizer to a limited extent, increased water to a limited extent, decreased competition from other non-beneficial species, and better management in utilization of yield and of harvest, timing, and integration. They are the same factors which cause imbalance as the selection of types for a particular yield need not be the factor that enables it to produce consistently in field. Field conditions, whether it be feathering to a standard in a chicken, redness in a rose, or weight in a fish, high-producing hens need biennial replacement, thus a constant breeding program, and may not even set their own eggs, thus needing artificial aids. A water and fertilizer-dependent crop is liable to collapse when it is water or nutrient stressed, or 22, becomes too expensive to maintain in any market downturn. To go for one such crop, and so decrease diversity, is to decrease insurance for yield if one species or variety fails or is susceptible to change. Peasant farmers rightly reject advice based on maximum yield fallacies, and even more so if they share crops with the landlord, for they also value their spare time. In the case of livestock, forced production is eventually limited by insoluble or intractable illnesses, so that in high-producing New Zealand herds, veterinary costs reach $120 per stock unit for chronic illnesses such as facial eczema and white muscle disease on less stressed pastures. In farms, veterinary costs drop away to $20 or so per unit, top dressing of pasture is reduced, and healthier herds give healthier yields. In the end, the forcing of product yields creates unique and inflexible health problems in plants, soils, and animals. Such yields become economically and ecologically unsustainable and a danger to public health. 93% of chickens in battery cages develop cancers. If we eat cancer, we must risk cancer, for we are what we eat in a very real sense. Insurance of some yield on a sustainable basis is better than expensive feast and famine regimes. The home garden is one such secure approach, where it is rare for all crops to fail because of the innate diversity of such a mixed system. In fact, it is commonplace for gardeners to find a garden plant or some varieties fail in any one season, but no great harm results, as many other crops or varieties are available. Thus, species and variety diversity are what people really need. Plant variety rights legislation, plant patenting, and multinational seed resource ownership has had a disastrous effect on the availability of hardy, adapted, local varieties of plants, especially in Europe where some 85% of locally adapted seed crops have become illegal or have disappeared from seed company catalogs. There are several paths open to us in design, and the least energy path is the one we seek or evolve towards. There are two ways of producing an egg. The first has become the normal way in the Western world, figure 2.3, and the second is the way proposed by permaculture systems, figure 2.4. Some ridiculous systems have been evolved in which people, machines, time, and energy are expended in vast quantities on the chicken, perhaps with the aim of maximum product yield regardless of costs. We can shortcut these systems with great gains in personal and planetary health, and with a far greater variety of yields available for local ecologies. These illustrations also bring home the common sense nature of self-regulated systems, 2.6, cycles, a niche in time. Cycles are any recurring events or phenomena. They have another implication, which is one of diversion. A cycle is, if you like, an interruption or eddy in the straight-line progression towards entropy. It is the special provenance of life to cycle materials. So efficiently does this happen that in a tropical forest, almost all material nutrients are in cycle and life forms. It is this very complex cycling in the tropics which opened up so many opportunities for yield that thousands of species have evolved to take advantage of. These, if niches are opportunities in space, cycles are opportunities in time, a time slot, and both together give harbor to many events and species. Geese eat grass, digest it, molt, produce waste products, add parasites, digestive enzymes, acids and alkalis, and defecate. The ground receives the rejecta, the sun, shines and rain may fall, fungi, bacteria, grass roots, and foliage work on feathers and feces and re-metabolize them into life. If we reorganize and encourage such cycles, our opportunities to obtain yields multiply. Every peasant farmer who keeps pigeons, as they still do in the Mediterranean borders, knows this truth. Here, every thinking farmer builds his own phosphate factory as a pigeon loft. Each such cycle is a unique event. Diet, choice, selection, season, weather, digestion, decomposition, and regeneration differ each time it happens. Thus, it is the number of such cycles, great and small, that decide the potential for diversity. We should feel ourselves privileged to be part of such eternal renewal. Just by living, we have achieved immortality as grass, grasshoppers, gulls, geese, and other people. We are of the diversity we experience in every real sense. If, as physical scientists assure us, we all contain a few molecules of Einstein, and if the atomic particles of our physical body reach to the outermost bounds of the universe, then we are all de facto components of all things. There is nowhere left for us to go if we are already everywhere, and this is, in truth, all we will ever have or need. If we love ourselves at all, we should respect all things equally and not claim any superiority over what are, in effect, our other parts. Is the hand superior to the eye, the bishop to the goose, the sun to the mother? Principle of cyclic opportunity. Every cyclic event increases the opportunity for yield. To increase cycling is to increase yield. People are built up molecule by molecule, cycling through themselves the materials of their environment, its air, soils, foods, minerals, and pathogens. Over time, people create their own local ecology, as do wombats and all sedentary animals. Their wastes, exudae, and rejecta eventually create the very soils in which they garden. Garbage in, garbage out applies equally to computers and people. We gardeners are constantly cycling ourselves, and by a generational pattern of adjustment become eco-compatible with our landscape and climate. We are not the end point of evolution, but a step on the way, and part of a whole sequence of cycles. It is the number of such degenerative, regenerative cycles unknowable to us, which determine the number of opportunities in the system and its potential to change, mutate, diversify, and reintegrate. Not only can we never cross the same river twice, we can never see the same view twice, nor know the same system twice. Every cycle is a new opportunity. In nature, it is our right to die and make way for our successors, who are ourselves re-expressed in different forms. It is our tolerance of the proliferation of life which permits such cycles. Deprived systems like those, blasted by biocides, lose most oral opportunity to transcend their prior state, and the egg of life is broken, degrades, and assumes a lower potential. Tribal peoples are very much aware of and tied to their soil and landscapes, so that their mental and physical health depend on these ties being maintained. The rest of us have suffered forcible, historic dislocations from home sites, and many no longer know where home is, although there are new and conscious moves to re-inhabit the earth and to identify with the bioregion as home. Travel itself causes stress and morbidity. Travelers both carry and acquire pathogens and spread them to other cultures. New settlers bring new species, new timetables, and new concepts. Local systems have to readjust or fail. These processes are analogous to the disturbance of old ecosystems by new ecological or climatic forces. The post-invasion evolution contains part of the old and part of the new system, so is itself a new assembly with new potentials. Too often, however, we have destroyed very productive local ecologies only to replace them with energy-consuming improvements of our own making. We have assumed the role of the creator and destroyed the creation to do. So, cycling of nutrients is continuous in the tropics, but is interrupted wherever drought, cold, or low nutrient status reduces the base opportunity, just as the killing of fish stocks reduces the yield. Such cycles are slowed or even stopped by climatic factors or by our interference. Cycles in nature are diversion routes away from entropic ends. Life itself cycles nutrients giving, opportunities for yield, and thus opportunities for species to occupy time niches. Cycles like comets have schedules or times to occur. Some are frequent and obvious like day and night, others long-term like sunspot cycles. Both short and long cycles are used in phenomenological reckoning by Aborigines, who use cycle indicators as time maps. Figure 2.3 Industrial methods of producing an egg. Figure 2.4 Permaculture, methods of producing an egg. Aspects of the time resource. Time is a resource which can accumulate in ecosystems. It can be lost to an evolving or evolved system by setback, adverse disturbance, just about the same way as we can set back the hands of a clock. Such setbacks are termed deflection states by ecologists. Ecosystems, especially those we are in process of, constructing or destroying, are always proceeding to some other state of evolution. Left alone, they may evolve at their own pace to some unknowable or imaginary endpoint, which we once called a climax state. However, forest climax states are temporary events in the long span of geological time. Australian studies show that old dune forests lose the battle to mobilize nutrients and begin to show a net nutrient loss aided by rainfall and occasional fire until they begin to recede to a less vigorous shrubbery system. Most other disturbed forests appear to be building, but if disturbed too often, never reach the previous vigor, height, or yield. This is obvious to many of us who have seen original regrowth and second regrowth tree stands. These show signs of decay at progressively lower heights, and no doubt these too are losing vitality with age. I can sympathize. Time can work as a rehabilitative resource for active. Intervention in such successions enables us to analyze and to supply key nutrients and soil treatments, if needed, to assist maximum forest rejuvenation. A second time concept is that of lifetime, or the quality time that we have to enjoy, examine, and understand our world. To the interested observer, it would seem that lifetime is very short indeed for those mobile, power-using, bombarded, employed, make-work, and busy humans who make up non-tribal societies, while many tribal people still manage to preserve a high quota of the celebrations, discussions, contemplations, mutual preening, and creative artwork on which many of us wish we had time to spend. This erosion of the lifetimes of people, exacerbated by the media and messages of the consumer society, is perhaps the most serious effect of that society. Life is too much with us. Late and soon getting and gaining, we lay waste our years. W.B. Yeats, people so harried that they have no time for anything else may find that time has run out to save themselves, their lives, or those of their children. A niche in time and space. Niche is a place to be, to fit in and find food, shelter, and room to operate. Many such niches are unfilled due to chance factors. Many are wiped out by agriculture or urban sprawl. Many can be created, but in pursuit of a simple food product, most farmers give no place for wildlife, no nesting sites or unbrowsed grass. For quail or pheasant, both industrious insect eaters, 26, and often no time for any intelligent assessment of the potential benefits of other species. Existence is not only a matter of product yield, but a question of appreciating variety in landscape. Evolving plant systems and existing animals provide niches for new species. The cattle egret follows cattle, the burrows of rabbits are occupied by possum, bandicoot, snakes, frogs, and feral cats, and the growing tree becomes a trellis, shade spot, and a host of fungus and epiphytes. Every large tree is a universe in itself. A tree offers many specialty forage niches to bird, mammal, and invertebrate species. For instance, yellow-throated honeyeaters in Tasmania search the knotholes for insects, tree creepers, the bark fishers, strong-billed honeyeaters, the rolls of branch bark and hanging strips of bark, and black-headed honeyeaters, the foliage, where pardalotes specify the scale insects as their field. As for time-sharing, the yellowthroats are permanent and territory-holding residents, the tree creepers migrants, the strongbills and blackheads roving flock. Species, and all of them scatter as breeding pairs in the spring and summer, so that it is rare to find any one tree fully occupied at any one time. There is also a pronounced post-breeding tendency for several bird species to form consociations for foraging and traveling in autumn and winter. 5 to 8 species travel together, some, for example, flycatchers, gathering insects disturbed by the others with all species, reacting to the alarm calls of any one species, but some, species mynas, for example, acting as sentinels for the whole mixed company. Here, we see time, space, and functions all used in a complex and non-competitive way, and glimpse something of the potential for designers to enrich, human societies providing that no individual or group claims a right to sole use at all times for an area. The failure of a monoculture to produce, sustain, or persist is thus easily explained, as many species are invading or trying to use more efficiently the complex resources of time and space. A combined space-time factor is called a schedule, a time to be in that place. Any observer of public park use sees the usage change hour by hour. Morning joggers give way to lunchtime office workers who are succeeded by older, retired people playing drafts, later displaced by evening entertainment crowds, and late at night, the people on the edge of time, the semi-legal, the unemployed, and the lonely. Towards dawn, only the lame and isolated strollers, often with dogs for companions, remain on the streets. Many mammals, forced to develop tracks and resting places, do not control areas, but rather time slots in space. My own studies of wild wallaby, urban people, and possum show this to be the case. Fighting occurs when one is out of schedule and ceases when that place is vacated for use. Schedules may run on long cycles, tuned to the level of browse or succession of vegetation. For example, a sequence of grazing has been observed for African herds so that Figure 2.5 niches in space and time, schedules. Not only can we fit species into various levels of plant structure, and broad ecotones of vegetation and soils, but also season, time of day, migration, and scheduling of space. Time relationships allows A. Complex use of vegetative resources by A. Great variety of animal species such as we see in the natural world. In this landscape, plant and animal species can find innumerable niches. A. In the vertical structure of vegetation. I for including A. Root zone. B. Across the aspects, zones, or soil catena variations with slope and with soil water depth. C. In the different orders of flow in streams. D. Within the different species that occupy specific sites or assemblies. E. At the edges or boundaries of any system, whole system evolution. All of the above are independent dimensions of the total spatial system as well. F. As seasonal migrants through the system. G. As opportunistic or eruptive visitors in floods, plagues, or after fires. H. As permanent residents of the system. All of the above are time slots, further complicated by A. Time, space components. I. As scheduled visitors sharing. A. 24. Hour access to specific sites and occupying nocturnal and diurnal time slots. F. I. Refer mainly to animal species, although all plants will have seasonal phases or responses, can invade or may schedule their flowering times as well. The whole system evolves through time, and climate trends, or disturbances such as fire, impose a serial mosaic on the site. Almost every significant time, space complex will have its unique species. There is always a way to enrich species diversity in such a system. Antelope follow wildebeest, follow elephant, or some such sequence for many herd species. This suggests that informed graziers, knowing the preferences of different species, sheep follow cattle, follow horses, follow goats, can make much better use of the basic browse resource by scheduling rotation, not to keep one level of browse constant, but to dynamically balance levels by species session. Scheduling the right to use a particular space at a specific time occurs within species, where dominant animals use prime grazing land at prime time, and subdominants are pushed to the edge of time and space, or between species, so that sequences of different species use the same area of vegetation at different seasons or stages of growth. No individual owns the area, just a time-space lot, like a chair in a family kitchen at dinner time. In Tasmania, there are two primetime activity peaks for wallaby over 24 hours, both at night. The main one is crepuscular, just after sundown, and the secondary one is auroral, just before dawn. This permits digestive and recuperative rest periods, denied to weaker animals who cannot compete for preferred periods. Within this framework, any possum can, by aggression, displace a wallaby at a feeding place. Any individual holds a place only for a short time, moving on to contest another area until satiated. Thus, the sharing of resources is a complex dynamic, but no species or individual has sole rights. A human analogy would be that of a sports ground used by different sports groups at times, by gulls or rodents whenever sports are not being played, and by worms at all times. To summarize, we have niche in space or territory, nest and forage, sites, niche in time cycles of opportunity, and niche in space-time schedules. Between these, there is always space or time available to increase turnover. Niches enable better utilization and greater diversity, hence more yield. Of all of these niches, schedules are the best strategy for fitting in new species of mammals, providing these are not territorial species which try to hold their own space at all times, but are chosen from cooperative species which yield space when the time is right. See Figure 2.5. There are lessons here for people. Those who try to hold on to all things at all times prevent their use by others. 2.7. Pyramids, food webs, growth, and vegetarianism. A figure often used to explain how much of a food or forage is needed to grow another animal is the trophic pyramid. While the pyramid is a useful concept, it is very simplistic, and in all but laboratory conditions or feedlot situations, it is unrelated to field reality. And 28. May only apply where we actually provide simple food to captive species. The field condition is very different. Figure 2.6. The pyramid is often used to support claims that we should all become vegetarians or herbivores. This is perhaps not so far from the truth, but there are real-world factors to consider. I have shown the pyramid and also a direct path herbage to human to illustrate how we would support more people if we ate vegetation. But we need to re-examine this concept for people who return their waste to gardens. There are the following factors to consider. 1. Nature is much more complex than is shown in a pyramid. Instead of simple trophic levels, we have a complex interaction of the same species, largely governed not by food habits, but by pasture management practices. Such a complex diagram is called a food web, and is the normality in field conditions. 2. Pyramids ignore feedback. In a very real sense, vegetation eventually eats grasshoppers, frogs, fish, and people. Not only that, but as an animal grows, it returns nutrient to the soil via excreted, molted, or discarded body waste. And even if the frog eats 10 kilograms of grasshoppers to make 1 kilo of frog, it doesn't obviously keep the 10 kilograms in a bag, but excretes 9 kilograms or more back to earth as manures. This causes more vegetation to grow, thus producing more grasshoppers. The manure from insect pests may be the basis of a regenerative future evolution. With these obvious feedbacks, the web itself becomes much more complex, and it starts to resemble less of a one-way staircase, the pyramid, than a series of cyclic events, less of a ziggurat and more like a spider's web. So the real position is that waste recycling to herbage is the main producer of that herbage. 3. What of maturity? If our fish level 4 was a carp, and that carp was more than a year or two old, then it would probably have reached full size, although it may then continue to live for another 80 to 100 years. So now, the carp at 80 years old and 10 kilograms weight has eaten 100 x 10 kilograms, equal to 1,000 kilograms of frogs and insects, and has returned 990 kilograms of digested material per year to the pond to grow more herbage. Thus, in order to keep the system in growth, we must be able to efficiently crop any level just before maturity is reached. We can see that old or mature systems no longer use food for growth, but for maintenance. So it is with mature fish, frogs, forests, and people. Old organisms thus become constant recyclers, food in, waste out, and cease to grow, or they even begin to lose weight. This is why we try to use only young and growing plants and animals for food if food is scarce. An exception is a fruit or nut tree, where we consume seed or fruit. Seed is an immature tree. 4. Are food chains so simple? We know that people normally eat vegetation, and that many people eat grasshoppers, frogs, fish, and at times other people. Even a cow eats grasshoppers as it eats grass, and of course every eater ingests large quantities of Figure 2.6 Trophic Pyramid. Life systems are rarely strictly hierarchical, as in the pyramid structure. Most species are omnivorous, and all species recycle valuable waste, products to lower levels of the trophic ladder. Thus, life systems are a web or cyclic systems rather than a pyramid. Bacteria and small animals living on vegetation. Man cannot live by bread alone, unless in a sterile laboratory condition. As our one-way pyramid is very suspect, so is the argument that we should become vegetarians to ameliorate the world food shortage problem. Only in home gardens is most of the vegetation edible for people. Much of the earth is occupied by inedible vegetation. Deer, rabbits, sheep, and herbivorous fish are very useful to us, in that they convert this otherwise unusable herbage to acceptable human food. Animals represent a valid method of storing inedible vegetation as food. If we convert all vegetation to edible species, we assume a human priority that is unsustainable and must destroy other plants and animals to do so. In the urban Western world, vegetarianism relies heavily on grains and grain legumes, for example the soya bean. Even to cook these foods, we need to use up very large quantities of wood and fossil fuels. Worse, soya beans are one of the foods owned 100% of patent rights by a few multinationals. They are grown on rich bottomland soils, in large monocultural operations, and in 1980 to 82 caused more deforestation in the USA and Brazil than any other crop. Worse still, about 70% of the beans were either fed to pigs or used in industry as a base for paint used on motor vehicles. Much worse again, grains and grain legumes account for most of the erosion of soils in every agricultural region, and moreover, very few home gardeners in the developed world ever grow grains or 29. Grain legumes, so that much of what is eaten in the West is grown in areas where real famine threatens. Mung beans from India, chickpeas from Ethiopia, soya beans from Africa, India. Old farmers and my own great-grandfather had a saying that bears some consideration. This was, "We will sell nothing from our farm that will not walk or fly off." In effect, the farmer was concerned to sell only animals, never crops or vegetation, because if the farm was to survive without massive energy inputs, animals were the only traditional recycling strategy for a sustainable export market. What does all this mean to concerned and responsible people in terms of their diet and food habits with respect to a sustainable natural system? 1. Vegetarian diets are very efficient, providing they are based on easily cooked or easily processed crop grown in home gardens, that wastes, especially body wastes, are returned to the soil of that garden, and that we eat from where we live and do not exploit others or incur large transport costs. 2. Omnivorous diets, any sort of food, make the best use of complex natural systems, that we should eat from what is edible at any level except for other people in most circumstances and under most laws. 3. Primarily carnivorous diets have a valid place in special ecologies, such as areas of cold, where gardening cannot be a sufficient food base, in areas where people gather from the sea, where harsh conditions mean reliance on animals as gatherers, and where animals can use otherwise waste products, such as vegetable trimmings, scraps, or rejected or spoiled vegetation. 4. We should always do our energy budgets. Whatever we eat, if we do not grow any of our own food and overuse a flush toilet, sending our waste to sea, we have lost the essential soil and nutrients needed for a sustainable life cycle. While a tropical gardener can be very efficient and responsible by developing fruit and vegetable crop, which needs very little cooking, sensible omnivorism is a good choice for those with access to semi-natural systems. City people using sewers would be better advised to adopt a free-range meat diet than to eat grain and grain legumes. Better still, all city waste should be returned to the soils of their supply farms. Even in our garden, we need to concentrate on cycles and roots rather than think in pyramids. Simplistic analysis of trophic levels fails to note that some food resources are unusable by people, either because the energy needed in processing is too much, since some products of nature are poisonous or unpalatable foods, or because the resources are too scattered to repay our collection. Such resources are often harvested into useful packages by other species. Herons, themselves edible, eat poisonous toadfish, and goats will browse thorny and bitter shrubs. Thus, we can specify these useful conversions before blindly. 30. Eliminating a life element of any type from our diets. While it is manifestly immoral to feed edible Peruvian fish to hogs in the USA, it may be of great value to convert forest acorns unharvested in the USA to hogs and let the pilchards and anchovies feed the hungry of Peru, which includes the pelicans. Trophic pyramid is valid enough as a conceptual model, for we can see that poisons at the base concentrate at the top. In fact, the highest level of some radioactives in DDT measured are found in mother's milk. We can see that the generalized or omnivorous non-selective feeder is buffered from catastrophic famine by a complex web of trophic connections, so that some losses and some gains accrue to people, being generally omnivorous. In short, people need to discard fixed ideas, examine their kitchen cupboards, and try to reduce food imports, waste, and energy loss. A responsible diet is not easy to achieve, but the solutions lie very close to home. Viva the Home Gardener 2.8. Complexity and connections. There are ecologies on very flat and somewhat invariant sites that in the end simplify, or are originally simple because that condition itself is not typical of the Earth's crust. Just as a field, leveled, drained, and fertilized for a specific crop, will not support the species that it once did when it varied in microelevation, drainage, and plant complexities. Other simple natural ecologies occur where rapid change can occur, sea coasts, or where we deliberately fire or plow on a regular basis, so that there is never enough time for a diverse system to establish. Marshes, swamps, tidal flats, salt pans, and level deserts support less diversity than adjoining hill and valley systems, but nevertheless in some, if species are assembled from global environments or from similar climatic areas, are still very rich, and in the case of mangrove and tidal marsh, extremely productive ecologies. It is not that a single stand of one mangrove species is itself so diverse, it is the mobile species working at different stages of decomposition of the mangrove leaf. Each of these species in turn feeds others. Thus, very simple plant associations may support very productive and complex animal associations. Mobile species are capable of occupying a great variety of niches in one mangrove tree or swamp stand, from underground to canopy, and of schedules from low to high tide. Time and space are needed for tree species to evolve a complex stand in such situations, and as they are often obliterated and reestablished by a worldwide change due to a sea level fluctuation, relatively little time can be allowed for mangrove species to themselves develop and colonize the new, and potentially short-term, shoreline, old deserts, like that of Central Australia may, exhibit some 3,000 species of woody plants, while recently desertified areas, like those of Southwest Asia, may have as few as 150 plants surviving the recent changes from forest. We can, in these cases, act as the agents of constructive change, bringing species to assist local recolonization from the world's arid lands. Such species will assist in pioneering natural reforestation. This has not generally been our aim, and we annually destroy such invaluable species complexes to grow a single crop such as wheat, thus laying waste to the future. The number of elements in an aggregate or system certainly affects its potential complexity, if complexity is taken to be the number of functional connections between elements. In fact, as Waddington 1977 points out, in the case of a single interaction, a conversation, between elements, complexity goes up roughly as the square of the number of elements. 2's company, 3's a crowd, and 5 or 6 is getting to be a shambles. This is bad enough, but if we consider the number of possible connections to and from an element such as a chicken figure 3.1, we can see that these potential connections depend on the information we have about the chicken, so that the complexity of a system depends on the information we have about its components, always providing that such information is used in design. As we cannot know everything, or even know more than the approximate categories and quantity of things which are, for example, eaten by chickens. Thus, in permaculture, we always suppose that the chicken is busy making connections itself about which we could not know, and of course, for which we could not design. We must simply trust the chicken. Thus, in common sense, we can design for what we believe to be essentials, and let the chicken attend to all. The details, checking at later stages to see that yields, our ultimate products, are satisfactory, the chickens healthy and happy, and the system holding up fairly. Well, it is important to concentrate on the nature or value of connections between elements. In nature, we can rarely connect components as easily as a wire or piece of pipe can be fixed into place. We do not connect the legume to the orange tree, the chicken to the seed, or the hedgerow to the wind. We have to understand how they function, and then place them where we trust they will work. They then proceed to do additional tasks and to provide other connections themselves. They do not confine their functions to our design concepts. Evolving complex species assemblies in isolated sites, like the Galapagos Islands, may depend more on a species swarm arising from pioneer or survivor species than on invaders adapting from borderlands. Only when many niches are empty is a species able to differentiate and survive without competition, so the dodo and Darwin's finches arose. Having arisen, they may then well prove to be very useful to other systems. Unique island species often have functions not easily found in continental and crowded ecologies. Frequently, hardy travelers like reptiles and crustaceans take up those niches that, on continents, are occupied by species of mammals and birds. It is not enough to merely specify the number of connections and not note their value in the system as a whole. It may be possible that complex social situations and cultivated or chance complexity may occur in natural systems by introductions or migrations. These new events, although increasing complexity, may reduce stability with respect to a desirable local yield. Thus, where the benign complexity of cooperative organisms is useful, competitive or inharmonious complexity is potentially destructive. Again, it is a question of matching needs with products and of the values given to connections. 2.9. Order or chaos. It follows that order and disorder arise not from some remote and abstract energy theory, but from actual ground conditions or contexts both in natural and design systems. Entropy is the result of the framework, not the complexity. A jumble of diverse elements is disordered, an element running wild or in an active, destructive mode bowl in a china shop is disordered, and too few or too many forced connections lead to disorder. Order is found in things working beneficially together. It is not the forced condition of neatness, tidiness, and straightness, all of which are, in design or energy terms, disordered. True order may lie in apparent confusion. It is the acid test of entropic order to test the system for yield. If it consumes energy beyond product, it is in disorder. If it produces energy to or beyond consumption, it is ordered. Thus, the seemingly wild and naturally functioning garden of a New Guinea villager is beautifully ordered and in harmony, while the clipped lawns and pruned roses of the pseudo-aristocrat are nature in wild disarray. Principle of disorder, order, and harmony produce energy for other uses. Disorder consumes energy to no useful end. Neatness, tidiness, uniformity, and straightness signify an energy. Maintain disorder in natural systems. 2.10. Permitted and forced functions. All key living elements may supply many functions in a system, but if we try to force too many work. 31. Functions on an element, it collapses. One cannot reasonably expect a cow to give milk, raise a calf, forage its own food, plow, haul water, and tread a corn mill. Forcing an element to function, however, is a very different proposition from putting it in position where its natural or everyday behaviors permit benefits to other parts of the system. Placed correctly, a tree or chicken experiences no stress not common to all trees and chickens about their daily business. Further, if we place any of the other elements needed close by, the tree or chicken has less stress than normal. It is the design approach itself that permits components to provide many functions without forcing functions that are not, in any case, inherent upon that element. The chicken may be busy but not overworked. People, too, like to be where their very different and complementary capabilities are used rather than being forced to either a single function, like a 300-egg-a-year chicken, or a typist confined to a computer operation in an office, or so many functions that they suffer deprivation or overload, like our cow above. Principle of stress and harmony. Stress here may be defined as either prevention of natural function or of forced function. Harmony may be defined as the integration of chosen and natural functions, and the supply of essential needs. 2.1. Diversity. Diversity is the number of different components or constructs in the system, an enumeration of elements and of parts. It has no relationship to connections between components, and little to the function or the self-regulating capacity of any real system, within the boundaries of too few or too many components. Thus, diversity, either of components or assemblies, does not of itself guarantee either stability or yield. Where we maintain such diversity, as in our gardens, then this may guarantee yield, but if we leave our gardens, they will simplify, or simply be obliterated by non-maintained and hardy species adapted to that site, as is evident in any abandoned garden. Thus, our own efforts are an integral part of maintaining diversity in a permaculture system. Few species grown by people persist beyond the lifetime of those species if we leave the situation alone. Australia is a country where towns may arise and be abandoned to serve a mining or port operation. Where these were built in forested areas, they are obliterated by forest in 30 to 80 years, with perhaps a few trees such as dates, mulberries, and figs persisting in savanna or isolated dryland locations. These survivor trees are important to note in planning longer-term stability for that region. 32. Great diversity may create chaos or confusion, whereas multiple function brings order and develops resources. I believe that a happy medium is to include as much diversity in a cultivated ecosystem as it can maintain itself, and to let it simplify or complicate. Further, if that is its nature. Very diverse things, especially such abstract systems as competing beliefs, are difficult to make compatible with any natural system or knowledge, so that some sorts of dogmatic diversity are as incompatible as a chicken and a fox. Although true incompatibility may be rare, one should be prepared for it to exist, and an intervening neutral component can be introduced, as is the case when growing those bad neighbors, apples and walnuts, where it is necessary to intervene with a mulberry, which gets along with them both. Principle of stability. It is not the number of diverse things in a design that leads to stability. It is the number of beneficial connections between these components. It follows that adding in a technology or living species just to have it there has no sense to it. Adding it in to supply a need or consume an otherwise wasted resource to do something useful makes a great deal of sense. Often, however, we lack functional information on components, and may therefore leave out technologies or species and designs which would have been useful had we known. Thus, information is the critical potential resource. It becomes a resource only when obtained and acted upon. In the real world, resources are energy storages. In the abstract world, useful information or time. Watt 1 in his categories of resources includes time and diversity. Diversity of itself is now not seen as a resource, but a diversity of beneficial functional connections certainly is a resource. Complexity, in the sense of some powerful interconnections between species, is what we are really seeking in food systems. Such complexity has its own rules, and we are slowly evolving those rules as recommendations for polycultures dealt with elsewhere in this book under their climatic character, istics, or as guilds of plants and animals that assist each other. Peter Moon, New Scientist, 28 February, 85 differentiates between richness, the number of species per unit area, diversity, the relative abundance of species, and evenness, how species contribute to the biomass total. He notes that richness may decrease in plants as systems age when shade and competition reduce, annuals or weaker species, but that richness may then increase in animals such as decomposers due to the development of a greater range of niches and microclimate. More animals live in ungrazed or uncut grasslands, but less plant species survive. Richness of tree species has very recently been correlated to the energy use of that plant community, as measured by evapotranspiration, New Scientist, 22, October 87. Thus, species-rich regions are not so much correlated to latitude, allied to richness in birds and mammals, or as a result of prior events such as glaciation or fire, but are essentially linked to the basic productivity of the region. Within this broader framework, local niches or a range of altitudes can create more diversity. Such measures refer to present, not past, climate. Some disturbance or moderate stress, such as we achieve in gardens, provides the richest environment. We can actively design to allow some undisturbed, low-stress islands of vegetation, while mowing or digging in other areas high stress, thus getting the best of both worlds in terms of a stress mosaic. We can also be active in plant and animal maintenance, increasing or decreasing grazing pressures, thus managing species, abundance locally. 2.1 stability. The short meaning of stability in an ecosystem is self-regulation rather than a climax endpoint stability. Nothing in nature remains forever, not soil or hills or forests. For our foreseeable future we can have dynamic life support systems, as tribal people have demonstrated to us all over the world, sometimes for thousands of years of constructive regulation. Thus, stability in ecosystems or gardens is not the stability of a concrete pylon, it is the process of constant feedback and response that characterizes such endeavors as riding a bike. We are also in an area of uncertainty about the concept of end states or climax in systems, the state to which they tend to evolve. It is doubtful if any such state ever existed, as inexorable climatic change, fire, nutrient leaching, and invasion deflect systems from their apparent endpoints. Moreover, it is probable that very old systems are also fragile, having been long in a state of maintenance, and we may see sudden or slow collapse in such evolved states. John Seymour Eco, Summer 81-82, notes the slow loss of nutrients in an old stable dune system at Kulula in Australia. Here, climax is a passing phase, as the virgin dunes lose nutrient status to fire and water filtration to great depths, where nutrients become unavailable to trees. Thus, the study of very old systems shows a retreat from the most evolved, greatest biomass condition, unless some new factor is introduced, ash from a volcano, fertilizer. Applied by people. Daniel Goodman, A Quarterly Review Biology, 53, notes that wild fluctuations may occur in tropical forests or in savanna grasslands. Epidemics of pathogens may affect a plant or animal species and sadly decrease its numbers. Although these natural fluctuations pale beside our own effects on ecosystems, such disturbances, providing they affect only a few, species are not as severe as persistent nutrient loss or acid rain. All these effects are under some human control in a developed ecosystem. Protection from fire, positive, nutrient supply to plants, and long-term evolutions are possible in terms of human occupancy. In the longer term, however, we too will be gone and other species will arise to replace us unless we take the earth with us, as megalomaniacs would do if we give them that chance. If I can't take it with me, I'm not going, just as it was the habit of kings to be buried with their riches, horses and slaves, so modern warlords threaten to bury all humanity as they depart. 2.13. Time and yield. Old systems store up their energy in bulky, unproductive forms. For example, an old forest has large trunks, roots, and limbs, and old fish are on maintenance. Such ancient systems composed of large individuals, trees, or animals need energy just to maintain their health, and thus they can use less of the available sun energy, so that flow of energy through the system is less. Therefore, the yield or turnover of matter is less. This too is a function of time aging. Matter is used up in system, maintenance, and is not available as yield or as increasing size or weight in life components. Against this factor, species diversity richness works to make the most of incoming energy. Carlander has shown that the standing crop of fish in different reservoirs is an increasing function of the number of species present. This is also true of studies in most wild systems, where the complexity and standing crop are both much more than the simple, cultivated ecology which replaces them, thus the clearing of an African veld or an Australian savanna of their web of species, and their replacement with a few perennial pasture plants. And beef cattle, or with a single species pine forest, not only takes enormous energy, but also grossly decreases total yields. We would do better to try to understand how to manage natural yields and modify such systems by management than to replace them with economic, here economic means monetary rather than energy return, systems which impoverish the yield and encourage disaster via pests and soil loss. Economics in future will inevitably be tied to yield judged on energy, rather than on monetary return. In the present economy, we waste energy to make money, but in the very near future, any system which wastes energy must fail. Pond and hedgerows both slowly gain species as they age, probably as a function of natural dispersal plus new niche evolution created by other species. This continues until the system begins to be overshadowed by a few large dominants or hyperpredators whose 33. Biomass represents an end storage of energy and a decreasing yield in the total system. Only local disturbance, fire, flood, death, renews the flow of energy through old systems. The time of cycling of natural systems may be a very long period, but in annual cropping it may be reduced to just one season or less. Permaculture thus uses the time resource much better than does annual gardening alone, and so uses sun energy to better effect. The mixed ecology of annuals and perennials maximizes not only product yield, but also the resourcefulness of the men and women who establish, control, and harvest it. It is only in a thoughtless, monetary, and doomed economy that we can evolve the concept of unemployed and unwanted human beings. Death in overmature systems is thus seen as the essential renewal of life, not in the negativistic sense of the fatalist, but in a positivistic and natural way. It is better that elements die and are renewed by other species than the system simplifies to extinction. It is better for the tribe if its components change than if it turns in on itself, ages, and decays as a whole. Life is then seen as a preparation for succession and renewal, rather than a journey to extinction. Time, as Watt notes, is a resource, like all resources. Too much of it becomes counterproductive, and a system in which too much time is accumulated becomes chronically polluted as a system in which not enough time has accumulated is below peak yield. Strawberry seedling and an old strawberry bush are equally unproductive, as are the very young and the very old in society. As there are age-specific diseases in people whooping cough, prostate hypertrophy, so there are age-specific diseases in whole systems, and a mixed-age stand is the best insurance against complete failure or epidemic disease of this nature. As individuals, we have a right to live a responsible life and a right to die if our efforts to prevent aging succeed. We may produce a crowded, unstable, and unproductive society subject to gerontocratic peevishness. 2.14. Principle summary. The prime directive of permaculture, the only ethical decision, is to take responsibility for our own existence and that of our children's. Principle of cooperation, not competition, is the very basis of future survival and of existing life systems. The ethical basis of permaculture. 1. Care of the earth, provision for all life, systems to continue and increase. 2. Care of people, provision for people to access those resources necessary to their existence. 3. Setting limits to population and consumption. By governing our own needs, we can set resources aside to further the above principles. 34. Rules of use of natural resources. Reduce waste, hence pollution, thoroughly replace lost minerals, do a careful energy accounting, and make a biosocial impact assessment for long-term effects on society, and act to buffer or eliminate any negative impacts. Life intervention principle. In chaos lies unparalleled opportunity for imposing creative order. Or law of return. Whatever we take, we must return. Nature demands a return for every gift received, or the user must pay. Directive of return, every object must responsibly provide for its replacement. Society must, as a conditions of use, replace an equal or greater resource than that used. Set of ethics on natural systems, one implacable and uncompromising opposition to further disturbance of any remaining natural forests, vigorous rehabilitation of degraded and damaged natural systems to a stable state, establishment of plant systems for our own use on the least amount of land we can use for our existence, and establishment of plant and animal refuges for rare or threatened species. The basic law of thermodynamics, as restated by Watt 13, all energy entering an organism, population, or ecosystem can be accounted for as energy which is stored. Or leaves. Energy can be transferred from one form to another, but it cannot disappear or be destroyed or created. No energy conversion system is ever completely efficient. As stated by Asimov in 1970, the total energy of the universe is constant, and the total entropy is increasing. Birch's 6 principles of natural systems. 1. Nothing in nature grows forever. There is a constant cycle of decay and rebirth. 2. Continuation of life depends on the maintenance of the global biogeochemical cycles of essential elements, in particular carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur, and phosphorus. 3. The probability of extinction of populations or a species is greatest when the density is very high or very low. Both crowding and too few individuals of a species may reach thresholds of extinction. 4. The chance that a species has to survive and reproduce is dependent primarily upon one or two key factors in the complex web of relations of the organism to its environment. 5. Our ability to change the face of the earth increases at a faster rate than our ability to foresee the consequence of change. 6. Living organisms are not only means but ends. In addition to their instrumental value to humans and other living organisms, they have an intrinsic worth. Practical design considerations. The systems we construct should last as long as possible and take least maintenance. These systems, fueled by the sun, should produce not only their own needs, but the needs of the people creating or controlling them. Thus, they are sustainable, as they sustain both themselves and those who construct them. We can use energy to construct these systems, providing that in their lifetime, they store or conserve more energy than we use to construct them or to maintain them. Mollisonian permaculture principles. 1. Work with nature rather than against the natural elements, forces, pressures, processes, agencies, and evolutions that we assist rather than impede natural developments. 2. The problem is the solution. Everything works both ways. It is only how we see things that makes them advantageous or not. If the wind blows cold, let us use both its strength and its coolness to advantage. A corollary of this principle is that everything is a positive resource. It is just up to us to work out how we may use it as such. 3. Make these change for the greatest possible effect. 4. The yield of a system is theoretically unlimited. The only limit on the number of uses of a resource possible within a system is in the limit of the information and the imagination of the designer. 5. Everything gardens, or has an effect on its environment. A policy of responsibility to relinquish power. The role of beneficial authority is to return function and responsibility to life and to people. If successful, no further authority is needed. The role of successful design is to create a self-managed system. Categories of resources. 1. Those which increase by modest use. 2. Those unaffected by use. 3. Those which disappear or degrade if not used. 4. Those reduced by use. 5. Those which pollute or destroy other resources if used. Policy of resource management. A responsible human society bans use of resources which permanently reduce yields of sustainable resources, for example, pollutants, persistent poisons, radioactives, large areas of concrete and highways, sewers from city to sea. Principle of disorder. Any system or organism can, except only that quantity of a resource which can be used productively. Any resource input beyond that point throws the system or organism into disorder. Oversupply of a resource is a form of chronic pollution. Definition of system yield. System yield is the sum total of surplus energy produced by, stored, conserved, reused, or converted by the design. Energy is in surplus once the system itself has available all its needs for growth, reproduction, and maintenance. The role of life in yield. Living things, including people, are the only effective intervening systems to capture resources on this planet and to produce a yield. Thus, it is the sum and capacity of life forms which decide total system yield and surplus. Limits to yield. Yield is not a fixed sum in any design system. It is the measure of the comprehension, understanding, and ability of the designers and managers of that design. Dispersal of food yield over time by selection of early, mid, and late season varieties. By planting the same variety in early or latter ripening situations. By selection of long-yielding varieties. By a general increase in diversity in the system, so that unleaf, fruit, seed, and root are all product yields. By using self-storing species such as tubers, hard seeds, fuelwood, or rhizomes, which can be cropped on demand. By techniques such as preserving, drying, pitting, and cool storage. By regional trade between communities, or by the utilization of land at different altitudes or latitudes. Principle of cyclic opportunity. Every cyclic event increases the opportunity for yield. To increase cycling is to increase yield. Cycles in nature are diversion routes away from entropic ends. Life itself cycles nutrients giving. Opportunities for yield and thus opportunities for species to occupy time niches, types of niches, niche in space or territory, nest and forage sites, niche in time, cycles of opportunity, niche in space-time, schedules, principle of disorder, order and harmony, produce energy for other uses, disorder consumes energy to no useful end, neatness, tidiness, uniformity, and straightness. Signify an energy maintained disorder natural. Systems, principle of stress and harmony. Stress may be defined as either prevention of natural function or a forced function, and conversely, harmony as the permission of chosen and natural functions and the supply of essential needs. Principle of stability. It is not the number of diverse things in a design that leads to stability, it is the number of beneficial connections between these components. Information as a resource. Information is the critical potential resource. It becomes a resource only when obtained and acted upon. 2.15 references. Waddington C.H., Tools for Thought, Paladin, UK, 1977.